So, I'm finally doing it. I'm going to rank every single movie made by Walt Disney Animation Studios. I have a lot of problems with the Disney Corporation, but I am willing to acknowledge that they have made some pretty good movies, and I thought it fitting to rank the movies from probably their most famous studio. So this is simply the movies from Walt Disney Animation Studios, and doesn't include any animated films from outside this studio, such as Pixar or Disney Toon. While this studio can put out the odd stinker, they've also made a variety of great movies, through both 2D and 3D animation. Many of their movies have become iconic, and for good reasons. I will establish in advance that I haven't actually rewatched all the movies for this specific video. When doing ranking videos, I've made a rule that I have to watch all the films or shows eligible, even if I've seen them before. There is one exception to this rule, however, and that's if I've seen the film or show twice and liked it neither time. And in this case, I've actually covered these films in previous ranking videos. For Pocahontas, it was in the Disney Renaissance ranking video, and for Chicken Little, Ralph Breaks the Internet and Frozen 2, it was in the Disney CGI ranking video. I have put more thought into my opinions from before, but it's mostly more points on why they don't work. And speaking of which, I have covered quite a lot of these movies in previous ranking videos, so I don't want to repeat myself too much, especially since this video will be quite long without it. Unless my opinion has changed on any of them, but I will provide points on why I like or don't like them either way. So, with this out the way, let's get started. The Three Caballeros is one of the most boring movies I've ever seen. The 1940s was a time where Disney released Pinocchio, Dumbo, Bambi, and a ton of anthology movies. While one of these was great, the others ranged from mediocre to shit. And this one is shit. The movie sets itself up to make you think Donald Duck will play an important part throughout, but he's pretty much sidelined for the first 30 minutes, and we don't even get the titular Three Caballeros until the 42-minute mark. Then when he does become a major character in the movie, he basically just gets a feathery boner for lots of different women, leading to a bizarre scene in which he arrives on a beach and flirts with a ton of women. It also makes the Lay You're Loving Me song sequence in Mamma Mia look normal, and the characters just talk and talk endlessly. Characters, or the narrator, spell out practically every individual thing like it's an episode of fucking Peppa Pig or something. I suppose the combination of live action and animation looks good, especially for 1944, and the part with the train is potentially intriguing, but it ends before it can go further. And I think that's it for positives. It's an almost worthless experience that I have no plans to revisit. Another really boring anthology movie from Disney. I can't remember anything that happened in most of these segments, but I'll sum up the ones where I do have something to say. Bumble Boogie is okay, and has some creative visuals. The Legend of Johnny Appleseed is okay, and has some sense of story to it. Little Toot is boring. Apparently it influenced David Mitton, the original director of Thomas the Tank Engine, to create Tux. Fuck, really? But Tux is so much better. Trees is briefly interesting because of its visuals, but grows stale quickly. And yeah, I have nothing at all to say about the rest. Just pure boredom. Oliver and Company is shite, but I put it above these movies because at least it tells a story, albeit a very, very loose one. It's an adaptation of the story Oliver Twist, a very dark and gloomy story. I've not read the book, but I've seen the film adaptation of the musical, which I loved. And what does Oliver and Company do? Well, it throws the well-handled dark tone, interesting themes, and even memorable characters out the window, in exchange for toned-down boredom and broken pacing. I can't think of a single plot point in this movie that has proper build-up. None of the characters or relationships feel genuine because there's no time to absorb them. The movie is always on the go, and what time could be spent getting to know these characters is wasted on piling on more characters and unforgettable song numbers. Many people consider Why Should I Worry to be the one good song in the movie. I disagree, I forgot it almost immediately. The thing I remember most about the song sequence is how the Billy Joel dog drags the sausages through wet cement, and somehow they're completely clean. I enjoyed the movie Oliver, and although Oliver Twist isn't the most interesting protagonist ever, at least he has an interesting goal and some sense of character arc. While it does have some fun song and dance numbers, they don't feel inconsistent with the otherwise rather dark tone of the movie, and it does have many memorable characters who we actually do have time to get to know. Oliver and Company has none of these things. The characters are bland, the pacing is too fast, the songs are forgettable, and the tone is fucking bizarre. Do I like anything about the movie? I suppose the backgrounds look decent, even if the characters themselves look cheap, and the lead up to the villain's death is decent, which isn't something I can say about the rest of the movie. And yeah, that's all I have to say. I realised the villain was voiced by Robert Loggia, so I could do the Family Guy joke to sum up this movie. It's Oliver and Company. O as in Oliver and Company. L as in Luke, did you see Oliver and Company? It sucked ass. I as in I thought Oliver and Company sucked. V as in Vincent, did you see Oliver and Company? It sucked ass. E as in everybody hates Oliver and Company. R as in Robert Loggia was in Oliver and Company. Space. and symbol. Space. C as in Christ on a bike, Oliver and Company sucked. Home on the Range is just really boring. Roseanne Barr voices a talking cow. She's just as funny in this role as she is in real life. In short,
not funny.
My pronouns are kiss my
and my pronouns are you're not funny. Ned will be right back. You've just told me to tell you. I'm hoping for not to come back soon. I have funny recording equipment right here. Okay, I'm back. Yeah, I just don't have much to say about Home on the Range. The characters are forgettable and or annoying. The jokes are shit, and the animation looks kind of cheap too. There's some decent songs, and one or two mildly funny jokes, but honestly, it's just a boring experience. Yep, I still hate this movie. Most of my opinion from my rewatch for the Disney CGI ranking has remained intact. The film is needlessly mean-spirited, the characters are unlikable, one-dimensional or both, the jokes, whether they be random cultural references or half-baked world building, are mostly unfunny. The soundtrack consists mostly of random pop songs, and the message is horribly executed. When people look at movies that try to replicate Shrek's style without understanding why it worked in that movie, Chicken Little is one of the main films that comes to mind for many. And yeah, Chicken Little is absolutely a Shrek wannabe. It's such a shame learning about the film's troubled production and how the director Mark Dindo wanted to make a completely different, and probably much better movie. There's only really two things from the original video that have changed for me slightly. The first is the scene in which Run to the Litter tries to get the soda from the drink machine. Admittedly, this is actually quite funny, and the only time I laughed outside of Adam West's cameo at the end. And the other is the animation. Oh, don't get me wrong, I still think it looks awful even for 2005, but I think I have a bit more to say about which parts of the visual style look bad. The character models themselves look fine for the most part, although some of them do look quite robotic. But the colour palette and the backgrounds are the part that make the film look unappealing. And I say again, this film came out 10 years after Toy Story and had almost 5 times that movie's budget, so there is no excuse for it to look this ugly. So yeah, I hate this movie. I hated it as a teen, and I hated it when I revisited it for the Disney CGI ranking video, and I have serious doubt I'll ever watch it again. But it's not at the bottom of the list, because unlike these movies, at least I felt something watching it. The Black Cauldron is so fucking boring. Despite some amazing visuals, I did not give a shit about the story. And the main character is an annoying twat, with Grant Bardsley delivering the lines like cardboard. Gogi is also an annoying twat, and when he sacrificed himself, I hoped he'd stay dead. But no, he had to be brought back. It's a boring story combined with 2 annoying twats who I could not stand. I was debating whether or not to put it above Chicken Little, but I ultimately decided to by a slight smidge because it has much better visuals. But ultimately, fuck this annoying snooze fest of a film. I was honestly too nice to Dinosaur in my Disney computer animated ranking video. While the first 8 minutes are pretty awesome, the boredom of most of the rest of the movie makes it hard to call passable. I don't remember any of the characters in the movie, and the fact that they talk ruins any sense of realistic illusion I could have gotten. I'm also kind of on the fence about whether the CGI is good for the time, especially since Jurassic Park has aged better, and the bare resemblance of plot is just so boring and predictable that I don't care. I considered putting this below these movies, but I can't really bring myself to, because the best parts of the movie are pretty great. These being the first 8 minutes, with some pretty great cinematography, a majestic score, and most especially, no dialogue. And, well, James Newton Howard's majestic score, which is strong throughout. I prefer to just listen to the soundtrack on its own, so I can sit perfectly still and appreciate the music. But, in spite of these good aspects, Dinosaur is mostly just a boring, predictable movie. Wish, the latest film from the studio. And it's one of the Disney movies. Something a lot of people have mentioned is how strange the art style is, and if you thought that Strange World reference was forced, don't worry, I'll get to this film's forced references. The film's art style has been frequently compared to Spider-Verse, and yeah, it definitely seems like it copied that film's style, but without understanding why it worked in that film. Spider-Verse films were comic book films, so a unique blend of 2D and 3D animation worked in that film's favour, balancing out the art style of comic books with cinematic eye candy. And while Puss in Boots: The Last Wish almost definitely took inspiration from those films, it used it for the purpose of stylized action scenes. Wish uses this art style throughout the film, and in the case of this film, it looks unfinished. Personally, I think continuing with their usual 3D style would have been the better decision. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And on to the story. I can't say I remember much about it, to be honest, though it definitely came off as a Shrek wannabe, even if it was a step up from Chicken Little. The film also has homages to many Disney films, and they feel simply like fan service. If I want a great homage to Disney's past works, I'll watch Once Upon a Studio. That's all I have to say at the moment, and I can't say I'm big on the songs either. Brer and the Last Dragon is boring. The visuals look amazing, and the music is often quite good, but I just found the story really boring. I don't remember much about the characters, apart from Sisu, who just annoyed me. I put it above Dinosaur because its visuals are more likely to stand the test of time, and there's more sense of story to it, but that's honestly the best I can say about it overall. I legitimately wanted Edgar Bergen to smash those ventriloquist dummies. Fun and Fancy Free is another bad anthology movie. This one has two segments, one completely boring, the other could be decent, if not for those annoying dummies interrupting repeatedly. Bongo. Visually stunning, but void of interesting storytelling. Basically just a bland rip-off of Bambi, and to some extent Dumbo. Mickey and the Beanstalk. To be fair, I have a little more to say about this one. I thought it was just going to be Jack and the Beanstalk with Mickey Mouse thrown in, but it has some merit to it. I liked how the giant was built up as a huge threat, but he's actually an idiot, who also manages to be a legitimate threat. They struck an almost perfect balance there, it's funny. Otherwise, there's not really much to it. And oh my god, those fucking ventriloquist dummies! Ah! You could have had a decent segment, Disney, but you just had to throw in those obnoxious fucking dummies! Ah! So, it's mostly just a boring and sometimes annoying experience, but it was entertaining occasionally. Again, most of my opinion from before still stands. It's a boring and very misguided take on racism that questionably tries to both sides the issue of colonialism. The romance between Pocahontas and John Smith, even ignoring how questionable it is from a historical context, is not interesting at all. I just don't have much more to say about the film that I haven't said before. The animation, the instrumental score, and the songs just around the riverbend and colours of the wind are great. But otherwise, it's mostly a boring and distasteful movie that takes a lot of artistic license with the true story, and not in a tasteful or intriguing way. This movie sucks, and while it may not be as bad as Pocahontas or Chicken Little, it is more insulting, as it takes great characters and butchers them, with Ralph and Vanellope's relationship coming off more as a weird, needy, clingy friendship than the father-daughter or older brother-younger sister vibe from the first movie. It's also crawling with plot holes, product placement, poor attempts at comedy and emotional depth, and bad morals about internet popularity. And it's still on the list of movies I'm considering doing a full analysis video on to go more into the problems it has. The stuff with the Disney princesses is still funny, the Sorcerer song is good, and visually it still looks pretty good. And while I think I have said in the past that Pocahontas was better, I take that back upon further thought, because at least this movie is interesting. Despite it being terrible and insulting, it's definitely not boring, which is more than I can say for this bland piece of shit. But for the most part, this movie sucks, and I have no plans to revisit it. But luckily I do remember the movie very well, and this will give me material for when or if I get round to doing an in-depth video on how it wrecked, pun intended, a good franchise. Another one of the not-so-good anthology movies. The animation and music are good, and there's occasional creative moments with the animation, but it's not particularly intriguing overall, and I don't really have a lot to say about it. The film tries to be educational a lot, but, well, it tries to be educational too often, and when it tries to be fun, it often just doesn't really succeed, even with the odd creative moment or joke with Donald or Goofy. Thankfully, the film is less than 45 minutes long, and I'd take it over the boredom of the Three Caballeros, Melody Time, or Fun and Fancy Free, mostly because it's much shorter. I've seen this movie 3 times, and I swear it gets worse on every viewing. Third time round, and I can say, this is a bad movie. I'm struggling to remember what I used to enjoy about this movie, apart from the animation and music, which are pretty stellar to be fair. I think the main problem with the movie is the script. The slapstick with the animals is not only just kind of boring, and pretty much a cheap knockoff of Tom and Jerry, but it goes on for far too long, and takes up at least half the movie. Then the other half, which actually focuses on Cinderella, you know, the titular role, basically leads to an outcome that Quentin Tarantino would almost definitely have a wet dream about. And it's not particularly interesting either. Cinderella and the Prince are both bland characters, and the latter is just a plot device. They spend so much time together at the ball, but he somehow doesn't learn her name before midnight. Also, if the slipper was a perfect fit, how did it slip off? And that's all I really have to say, to be honest. It's just kind of a boring movie, really. Visually stunning, but ultimately a style over substance movie. Lady and the Tramp had enjoyable moments, and yet, by the time it finished, I remembered very little about it. Mostly the spaghetti scene, and the scene with the horribly stereotypical Siamese cats, who never appear again afterwards. The story just kind of feels aimless, and while I can commend Disney for not doing the love at first sight trope, the romance between the titular characters is not that interesting. She gets angry at him when discovering he's had multiple girlfriends before, but then it's resolved in the next scene. I'm not gonna lie, these kinds of cliches, whether they be the misunderstanding, the lie revealed, or the argument, are very hard to do well. Because if you have them reconcile in the next scene, it feels pointless. And if you have them go off before realising they were idiots and reconciling, it brings the film to a grinding halt, because you know it's going to happen. And thus, no tension is created from it. So, it's pointless either way. These cliches can be done well, but most times, they just aren't, and this film is unfortunately no exception. And the pacing is really off. The movie feels very slow for the most part.
Oh shit! A rat!
Only to then throw a lot into its last 10 minutes. I don't have much else to say. I'd say the animation was good, but at this point in writing out my thoughts, that's just kind of a predictable plus, even though it is one here. Pretty forgettable overall. The Sword and the Stone has a fun climax, and yet, just like Lady and the Tramp, the story feels kind of aimless. It seems from the beginning that it's about Arthur's journey to become king, but then it's just educational hijinks with Merlin, and then at the end, it's back to Arthur's journey to becoming king. You'd think that Merlin's education would help Arthur become the rightful king, but at the end, King Arthur realises he may not be cut out to be king, only for Merlin to appear and say he'll help him get there. So what was the point in all of that then? Are the educational hijinks fun? Not really. The fight between Merlin and Mim at the end is fun, but that's about it. You'd think Arthur might join the fight and get character development in learning what it would take for him to become king, but he doesn't. Don't have much more to say really, just kind of boring for the most part. Boy, this movie has not held up as I've gotten older. Alice in Wonderland is visually stunning, and there's a lot of really creative moments with the animation, but it's a style over substance movie. Kind of like Lady and the Tramp and the Sword and the Stone, the story is just kind of aimless, and while it has fun moments, a lot of the characters just feel unimportant and forgettable. The Queen of Hearts is the best character in the movie, and the last 15 minutes are quite entertaining, but she only appears in the last 15 minutes. She's the main antagonist of the movie, but she doesn't really pose much of a threat throughout the film. And what follows on from an admittedly rather fun maze chase is... Alice wakes up. The entire movie was just a dream, and not even one where Alice becomes a changed person as a result. So it was just kind of pointless really, and also not entertaining enough to forgive such a cop-out. A lot of people hate Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland, and I can understand not liking it as much as I do, but it does tell a coherent story, and it gives Alice an interesting character arc, the Red Queen has presence throughout the movie, and it doesn't just turn out to be a dream at the end. Don't really have much more to say about this Alice in Wonderland though, a failure for me overall. Frozen 2 is an ambitious failure, but still a failure. Everything I said in my Disney CGI ranking video still stands, and I'm still working on my analysis video on why the movie's troll production really shows through in the movie. I can watch movies with a troll production but still consider them good, but if the troll production shows through in the film, like with Frozen 2, that's not a good sign. I know a lot of people who like Frozen 2, and I can understand why, and if you like the film, that's absolutely fine, but I just couldn't get into it. The story is full of plot holes, most of the characters are flanderized, the tone is a mess, and the ending is such a cop-out. There are things about the movie I hate, particularly Olaf, but I don't hate the movie as a whole. And if given more time to make, it could have been a good sequel, or even an Elsa spin-off, which I think would have been the better choice. Make My Music is... okay. Most of the segments are just kind of forgettable, but there are 3 good ones. All the Cats Join In features creative animation, even if it doesn't feel very cinematic. Two Silhouettes is visually stunning, and one I can actually imagine in Fantasia. Johnny Fedora and Alice Bluebonnet is probably the weakest of these 3, but still quite wholesome, and at times creative with the animation. And the rest are just kind of forgettable to be honest. It's possible, but not much more. And the last anthology movie of the 1940s makes its appearance, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. And, well, it's the best of the 6 consecutive anthology movies, but it's just okay overall. The Wind in the Willows segment is decent, and has some fun action. It's also interesting to see how much animation the Jungle Book recycled from this one. I'm guessing it's because animation is expensive and hard to do. The Sleepy Hollow segment is just kind of boring to be honest. There's some creative animation, especially with the Headless Horseman, but I legitimately forgot what the segment was about after I'd finished it. So it's... okay. But to say it's the best of the consecutive anthology movies isn't saying much, because they don't set the bar particularly high. Their first anthology film, however, we'll get to that masterpiece later. Never been particularly big on the Aristocats. Aristocats? Aristocrats? Oh wait, very different movie. It's okay, but not much more. I can understand why people like it, and it's mostly harmless, other than the obvious. Yikes. But it didn't do much for me. The songs are pretty forgettable, and the characters aren't much to write home about. There's some fun action scenes, particularly the final one, but as I said earlier, there's not much to write home about overall. As with my first viewing, just kind of meh. All my pros and cons from the Disney Renaissance rankings still stand, though I will add the music as another pro. Don't have much more to say beyond what's already been said, so moving on. I'm not a fan of Brother Bear. The animation looks great, and the beginning and ending are decent, but the middle section of the movie is just dull, with some rather forgettable and annoying characters, which is kind of sad when Rick Moranis is the voice of one of them. Phil Collins comes back to do the songs, and the use of songs has a similar problem to Tarzan, but to an even worse extent, with the quality of the songs going on a downward spiral. Once again, we have Coda singing the start of On My Way, only to then cut to Phil Collins singing. Then we get Welcome, which is a laughably whimsical song about a bear tribe. Then, most insultingly, it leads to a rather promising moment in which Kenai realizes he killed Coda's mother, and eventually confesses the truth. But you have the overly dramatic No Way Out playing over it, which ruins the tension. Why do Disney keep on having the characters sing what they say, only to then have Phil Collins interrupt? And in this case, unlike Tarzan, I don't think any of Collins' songs are particularly strong this time. Visually stunning, but void of interesting story, characters, or songs.
It's kind of about a man.
Oh man. Oh God. Oh man. Oh God. Oh man. Oh God. Oh man. Oh God. Oh man. Oh God.
Strange World is a mixed bag. Jaeger is entertaining at times, the animation looks great, and having a queer main character is a step in the right direction for Disney. But it's not particularly noteworthy otherwise. The movie flopped at the box office, and I'm wondering if there's a specific reason for it. Is it because Disney refused to censor the LGBTQ+ references for release in other countries, which I absolutely support? Or did Disney not market it properly because it had a queer main character in it? But looking at the movie without its marketing, yeah, it's pretty mid-tier overall. First time I watched this movie was back in 2021, so I could join my friend Sophie in ranking the Disney princesses. At the time, I considered the movie decent, but Princess Aurora to be a bland protagonist. Aurora bored me. Alice, am I right? Rewatching it for this ranking video, she's still a bland protagonist, and the movie is a little worse overall. The visuals and music are great, Maleficent is a good villain, and the fairy godmothers are quite funny, including this hilariously savage exchange.
It looks awful. That's because it's on you, dear.
But they're not the focus of the movie. The focus of the movie is the bland Aurora and the bland Prince Philip, who, although he has more character than the princes in Snow White or Cinderella, is still not that interesting to me. The climax of the film, while visually striking, just feels like it's built on conveniences, in which Prince Philip either narrowly escapes one of Maleficent's traps, or something is resolved with the magic of the godmothers. And I don't have much more to say really. I rewatched Bolt for this ranking video, hoping I would change my opinion from the Disney CGI ranking and appreciate it as a good movie, but it became worse on this viewing. I still think the plot rings too similar to The Truman Show and Bolt's character arc to Buzz Lightyear in Toy Story, except that the logic behind the rules of the TV program make less sense than those of The Truman Show. They say they can't reshoot because it will ruin the illusion for Bolt, and in turn ruin the illusion for the viewer, but are you really telling me there's never been an electrical fault, or an actor making a mistake, or even a blackout? And it's hard to suspend my disbelief this far, considering that the movie does take itself quite seriously. Previously I did say I liked John Travolta as Bolt, but this time around, while he isn't terrible, I just don't think his voice fits the character. I remember Shea Frillis saying he believed Adam West would have been a better choice, and after hearing him say it, I agree. Could really up the light-hearted nature of the film. Bolt isn't a bad movie, and I can understand why people like it, but at this point, I don't feel the need to watch it again. The Great Mouse Detective is such a weird movie to me. While it does have a fun climax, and the concept behind the rivalry between the hero and the villain is kind of entertaining, the world building is so bizarre that it's hard not to gloss over. So, it's a movie consisting mostly of mice and rats, also cats and dogs in supporting roles, and most locations are ones made for rodents to access. Okay, but there's also human-sized locations and objects. Buckingham Palace has both an entry for humans and for mice, and no humans at the palace have questioned this. There seems to be a mouse Queen Victoria as well as a human one, and the climax involves a fight at the human-sized Big Ben. Not gonna lie, this movie might have worked if it was about humans discovering the existence of mouse-inhabited places, but despite plenty of human-sized building and objects, humans seem to be absent from the movie, and it's not quite off-the-wall insane enough for me to just laugh and gloss over. And this aspect is very oddly distracting. What do I think of the rest of the movie? Well, I like the stuff I mentioned at the beginning, but I don't have a lot to say otherwise. It's alright. Dumbo was a strange one. I like what the movie is building up, and I think the relationships Dumbo has with his mother and with Timothy are quite touching. The animation also looks great, and the song Baby Mine is very nice to listen to. Where the movie really suffers is with its pacing and coherence. The last 20 minutes feel like an absolute clusterfuck. The pink elephant scene is just too weird to enjoy even ironically. It adds nothing to the story, and it goes on for 5 minutes. And the scene in which Dumbo is given the feather to help him fly didn't feel fleshed out enough, especially since in the very next scene, he realizes he doesn't need it. The movie is just over 60 minutes long, and I feel like they should have put less of that runtime into the pink elephant scene, and more into the plot point about the feather. So, it's a decent movie, but not much more, and it's definitely not on the same level as the iconic Tom and Jerry short Jerry and Jumbo. Atlantis: The Lost Empire is pretty average. It has some quite interesting characters, and the world of Atlantis is quite an intriguing one, and my god does it look amazing. But all this is brought down by a predictable story and bland villain, and that's a shame, because if these things were fixed, this could be a good movie overall. Not bad, but far from Disney's best. Before I get onto the 7 out of 10 or higher films, I thought I'd take a brief moment to talk about their celebratory short, Once Upon a Studio, made to celebrate the studio's 100th anniversary. As people have said, it's a great short that comes off less as them showing off what they own, but more what they made. It features references to all their animated films, rather than just the most popular, and refrains from including characters from Pixar, Star Wars, Marvel, etc. It's essentially the anti-Ralph Breaks the Internet. They even utilise both 2D characters and 3D characters, rather than just one or the other. And the interactions between the characters are genuinely fun to watch. If Disney's going to keep milking all their pre-existing properties, they should consider doing a series of shorts showing more interactions between their characters, and or have them sing songs from each other's films. And with that, let's continue with the ranking. I didn't think much of The Rescuers the first time I saw it. It was a decent watch, but not much more. On rewatch, it's still not amazing, but I liked it a lot more. I still don't think the animation looks great, but the film does have a certain amount of charm and comfort to it. The titular rescuers are likeable characters, and I like how their romance is built up over the course of the movie without it hijacking their roles in the story. Penny is a likeable character as well, and I feel bad for her situation and root for her to find a family, even when her arsehole kidnapper tells her it won't happen. Seriously, fuck that woman. I also like how the characters being animals is worked into the story quite often, and it's fun seeing the local animals help Bernard, Bianca and Penny escape during the climax, as well as the rather wholesome ending in which the latter is hailed as a hero and finally adopted. The Rescuers is a good movie overall. Hercules is a good film. That's about it. Everything I said in my Renaissance ranking I stand by, and I mostly consider it good because of the song Go the Distance, the animation, the climax, and James Woods' vocal performance. Although, I do think Danny DeVito is funnier than I gave him credit for. I've now seen the film 3 times, and each time, I thought it was a good movie. Not up there with the best animated Disney movies by a long shot, but far better than a lot of their movies. The thing that easily carries Treasure Planet the most is John Silver, a superb and layered Disney villain. I like that he's not a twist villain, and how we know he's a villain very quickly, but the protagonist Jim doesn't, and as such, tension is built up. I also like how even though John has an obsession with money, he does care for Jim, and eventually prioritises his life over the treasure from the titular planet. On top of that, the animation is fantastic. This was one of Disney's final 2D animated movies, and a lot of effort went into this part of the movie in particular. And, despite these things, the movie is quite flawed. The side characters are either bland or annoying, and the space setting doesn't really add anything to the story. As a reminder of that, the ships are just like sea ships, and the ports just like Earth ports. I personally think Disney should have done a traditional adaptation of Treasure Island, but kept the characterization of John Silver from this movie. I think my rating is a little generous here, but I think it's the relationship between Jim and John that elevates it to a good movie. Although, much like with Hercules and The Rescuers, the 7 out of 10 is much closer to a 6 than an 8. 2 years ago, I watched The Princess and the Frog for a Disney Princess ranking on my friend Sophie's channel. I stated how intrigued I was by Tiana as a character, a fast thinker, positive, and a workaholic, who has a desire to turn a rundown sugar mill into a restaurant. Though, not so much for herself, but rather to fulfill her late father's wish, and I like Anna Kononi Rose's vocal performance. Revisiting the movie for this ranking, and summing it up as a whole, I like it. Not as much as I did the first time, but a perfectly good movie all the same. I like the first act the most, and how it sets up the story, and the third act is a good ending. I like a lot of the characters,
but one I would like to mention is Charlotte. I like how even though she is spoiled and occasionally entitled, she does care for her best friend Tiana. I especially love how she wants a prince for the entire movie, but gives up the opportunity when she sees the love Tiana and Naveen have for each other. And honestly, when she catches the bouquet, it's warranted. I also think the movie has some good songs, particularly Down in New Orleans and Almost There. I especially like the art style of the song sequence for the latter, and as you'd expect with Disney, the animation is great throughout the movie. And yet, despite these good aspects, I don't find the stuff with the animals as interesting. Even the songs take a bit of a dive, and it does make the second act less interesting, but not bad at all. It's just mostly the human stuff that intrigues me. And while the third act is a good end, it does use the misunderstanding part, which has a predictable outcome, but I do like Tiana's decision not to take Facilia's offer in order to not dishonour her father. The Princess and the Frog is a flawed, but good movie overall. Bambi is a good movie. That's about it. It's visually appealing, with very intriguing and naturistic backgrounds, and a lot of the characters are likeable. But I can't help but feel that some parts feel rushed, the death of Bambi's mum being an example. It's one of the most famous, maybe infamous, moments in the film, but it's hard to get emotionally invested because it feels too rushed. The film really whiplashes from this really dark and sad moment to just abruptly becoming cheerful and upbeat again, and I don't think the death of Bambi's mum is ever even brought up again in the film. With that said though, I think the hunter never being shown adds to his eeriness as a villain, which not only shows that villains in society can come from anywhere at any time, but also presents a well-executed message to us about the importance of nature. Bambi is nothing amazing, but it is a good movie overall. The first 2 times I watched Tangled, I didn't think much of it, but I never actively disliked it, meaning I was willing to go with third time lucky optimism in finally appreciating it as a good movie. And it paid off. The third act still really frustrates me. They throw in all the cliches, then Eugene dies and Rapunzel is able to use magic tears to save him. How? Rapunzel clearly stated that if her hair was cut, it would lose its magic. I've heard some people say the magic is stored within her and the hair makes it easier to get to, but in that case, why can't she grow the hair back out again? It wouldn't even be a burden anymore now that Gothel was dead. But despite this, I like the first 2 acts a lot more. The setup of the movie is really good, and this time around, while Gothel does have similarities to Frollo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame, I forget it quite quickly, mainly because the stories go in different directions. And Gothel is an interesting villain, forced to go to evil measures to get eternal youth, and I do have more appreciation for Mother Knows Best this time around. The characters are also quite entertaining. Rapunzel and Eugene have funny and intriguing chemistry, and Maximus has a lot of humorous moments as well. And I still love the I See the Light song sequence, though I do have to question why Rapunzel's hair doesn't light up when she and Eugene sing to each other. I can now say that I do appreciate Tangled as a flawed, but overall good movie. Upon rewatch, Tarzan is actually quite good. A lot of my problems from before still stand, including Rosie O'Donnell's vocal performance as Turk, as well as the predictable twist villain, and I'm still not big on all of Phil Collins' songs, though some are better than I gave credit for previously. A lot of the emotional beats do hit harder in this one, especially the relationship between Tarzan and Carla, which is very poignant. And I do also like the romance between Tarzan and Jane. And while the twist villain is predictable, his death scene is welcomely brutal. Back when Disney didn't build up dark moments just to chicken out at the last second. And while a lot of these things are good, the way the songs are used feels unbalanced. I remember Shea Frillis mentioning this in his video, but it's especially jarring to hear Carla sing the first verse of You'll Be In My Heart, only to then go to Colin singing it. Having Carla sing the whole song, followed by a later reprise when accepting Tarzan's decision to leave, would have been so emotionally powerful. You could say the songs were the inner thoughts of the characters, but these shifts make that implication more unclear. There's also a random song number sung by Turk and the others when they wreck the human possessions. Either commit to the characters singing, or don't. Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King also have non-diegetic songs, but it's made clear that these are the inner thoughts of the characters. They even have both male and female singers to represent that. And when they do become diegetic, it's to show the side characters discussing the situation. I also don't like the relationship between Tarzan and Kerchak, and the scene where they make peace on the latter's deathbed feels so forced. I get that Kerchak is reluctant about adopting Tarzan, but then why have such a shoehorned reconciliation at the end? With all this said, Tarzan is still a good move overall, and if I redid the Disney Renaissance ranking, which I won't need to thanks to this video, I'd put it as the new number 7. I'm really not a dog person, yet I still enjoyed 101 Dalmatians. As well as having a superb villain in Cruella de Vil and a funny henchman Jasper and Horace, it also has a lot of intriguing characters all around. I like the owners, I like the housemaid, I like Pongo and Perdita, and I like all the animals who help them when they escape Cruella and her henchmen. With that said, the puppies themselves are not particularly interesting. This kind of thing wouldn't bother me because, well, there's 99 of them. I wouldn't expect them all to have distinct personalities. But it's the fact that they try to give one of the puppies the personality trait that he's fat and always hungry, and that's all they really do with him. This kind of reminds me of how most of the others are not that distinct or unique. But this isn't a major problem. With fun chase scenes, likeable characters, and superb villains, and an interesting art style, 101 Dalmatians is fun and wholesome for all ages. I never thought much of Robin Hood as a kid, but revisiting it as an adult, I do like it a bit more. I usually tend to dislike when films and shows take a pre-existing story or concept and make all the characters animals or inanimate objects, usually because it feels like a cover-up for a lack of originality, and or because it creates a ton of plot holes. Robin Hood is an exception to this though. It feels like a fresh take on the story. The characters being animals is incorporated into small aspects of the story, even if not major, and it doesn't create any plot holes. It also doesn't take itself too seriously, relying almost solely on a light tone, unlike say Shark Tale or Chicken Little, which take themselves too seriously and also feature frequent bizarre world building that creates a ton of plot holes. As such, Robin Hood stands out as its own unique telling that actually does bring new things. I like the heroes, and the villains are also quite entertaining to watch. With that said, I do wish Maid Marian had a bit more screen time, maybe some to build up the romance between her and Robin Hood more. But it's not an unbelievable romance. And while Little John is likeable, he just feels like a clone of Baloo. Same species, almost the same design, and of course, same voice actor. I suppose another minor criticism I have of the film is the pacing can be a little slow at times. Mostly at the end, where Robin tries to trick the villains into thinking he's dead. At first, I was under the impression that him playing dead was being played obviously, but they dwell on it slightly too long, and I got the impression that they genuinely wanted to make you think he was actually dead. But again, this is a minor criticism. While nothing mind-blowing, Robin Hood is a good movie. The Jungle Book is one of the Disney films I watched the most as a kid. I think partly because my brother loved it. As such, I do have pretty strong memories of this movie. But I'm not going to let nostalgia blind me on this one. With that said, and despite the film's infamy for recycled animation, along with some of its animation being recycled, The Jungle Book is a good movie. One of my favourite parts of the movie is the music. The instrumental scores are nice to listen to, and come about at the right times, whether it be the more calming music to show the aesthetic of the jungle, or the more intense music during chase scenes. The songs also slap, particularly Bare Necessities and I Wanna Be Like You. I do, mostly, like the direction the story takes as well. Every character has some kind of role in the outcome of the story. With that said, I do feel like Car's second scene in the film is unimportant, and it plays out the same way his first scene did, except that there, it was necessary to boost Mowgli's mindset that he could look out for himself. Here, it doesn't really add anything, even if Car's song is decent. I also do wish more characters got to be active in the climax. Bagheera enlists the help of Colonel Hattie to help Mowgli, which, ironically, alerts an eavesdropping Shere Khan to Mowgli's existence. But then Hattie never appears again, and the only character who comes to the rescue in the climax is Baloo, as well as the Beatles-esque vultures who were already there anyway. With that said, I do like the friendship between Mowgli and Baloo. It's quite touching, and it manages to avoid crossing the line of becoming weird and clingy, unlike some things. And their argument doesn't feel forced or overly emotional, and I like that the movie can focus on other plot points between Mowgli running off and Baloo coming to his aid in the climax. The Jungle Book is a flawed, but intriguing movie. Fantasia 2000 is definitely ambitious, and that ambition pays off, even if it doesn't live up to the original by a long shot. There are still some pretty great segments in this movie, the Pines of Rome and Firebird Suite segments being the best of all of them. They're visually stunning, and would have fit the tone of the original film perfectly. Symphony No. 5 is a simple but striking introduction, and Piano Concerto No. 2 has an interesting combination of animation styles. And there's The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which is pretty much the same as it was in the original, so my notes of praise about it being visually stunning with an interesting story really go to that movie. Then you have the other segments, and they're not bad, but they just don't fit the tone, or the cinematic atmosphere the Fantasia films go for. They just feel too cartoony. Maybe as short films, especially on TV, they'd work better. And I'm really not a fan of the celebrity cameos. Not because of the celebrities themselves, just the annoying material they're given. But in spite of this, Fantasia 2000 is a good movie overall. Peter Pan is actually quite fun to watch. While certain aspects of the movie have aged dreadfully, mostly the infamous portrayal of Indians, there's still a lot to enjoy. The animation, as usual for Disney, looks great. The music is also really good, and suits the atmosphere of the movie. Captain Hook and Mr. Smee are great villains, and the crocodile trying to eat Hook gives a lot of good laughs. I especially love the scene in which Smee tries to give Hook a shave, but accidentally shaves a seagull's arse instead. But, unlike the film that preceded it, the adventure Wendy goes on actually means something. Not only is the adventure real, but she comes back from it accepting that she'll grow up. And Peter Pan has a good character arc of being immature and stubborn about the idea of Wendy leaving, to then accepting her desire to return, and taking her, John and Michael home safely. And overall, it's just a fun experience. Nothing amazing, but a 7 out of 10 is practically a miracle after sitting through 8 consecutive mediocre to outright awful Disney movies. I too like Big Hero 6 more on the third viewing than I did on the second, but I still can't quite figure out why I loved it so much on my first viewing. I do love Baymax. He's hilarious and wholesome. I like the relationship between Hero and his brother, the way the film touches on themes of grief and family loss, and the arc Hero has regarding it. And yet, the movie does have flaws, particularly in its third act. The twist villain, while having understandable motivations, could have had more screen time. Perhaps maybe an establishment of his villainy in the second act. As well as this, Baymax's death is not only retconned, but also kind of pointless to the story. Could he really not have saved both him and Hero? But in spite of this, Big Hero 6 remains a good movie. The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh isn't quite as good as I remember, but it's still quite a calming and charming experience, with a variety of intriguing characters. The film takes the pre-existing Winnie the Pooh short films and puts them all into a feature film. The stories have a certain charm to them, and I like how some of the characters do have interesting arcs, including Tigger realising that not all times are good for bouncing, and Pooh's final scene involving him accepting that Christopher Robin can't be around as often, but nonetheless fulfilling a quite poignant promise to him at the end. The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh is an enjoyable and charming movie for all ages. Pinocchio is a pretty good movie. While it's not mind-blowing, it is quite an interesting experience, especially given how dark the movie is, and seeing Pinocchio smoke. Believe me, you would not get away with the latter today. While I do think adult protagonists can serve as great role models to kids, I also think a child protagonist can serve that role, and I think Pinocchio works as a protagonist, as he's someone kids watching will identify with, and as he learns to be brave, truthful and selfless, and earns his reward at the end for it, kids can learn the benefits of these traits alongside him. It also has some enjoyable songs, particularly When You Wish Upon a Star and I've Got No Strings, and the animation is very nice to look at, despite this movie's strange obsession with bottoms, and one that they kept in that god-awful remake. Although it doesn't live up to what would come later, or even the movie that preceded it, Pinocchio is still a fun and charming movie. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the first animated feature film ever made, but not the best one. In the lyrics to We Didn't Start the Pictures, I described Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs as a groundbreaking winner, and I stand by the fact that it's a winner in the field of how groundbreaking it is. The film was the first of its kind, and opened the gates for hundreds of animated films, some of which are among my favourite films. The fact that it's the first of its kind doesn't make it the best one, however. Snow White is a pretty bland protagonist, and the prince is just a plot device. The evil queen is a pretty decent villain, although her drinking the ugly potion instead of forcing Snow White to drink it is quite a strange idea. With that said, I like the film a bit more than I remember. The side characters are actually quite interesting. I like how Disney gave the dwarfs unique personalities. It's especially intriguing seeing Grumpy be, well, grumpy throughout the movie, only to later have a change of heart and be genuinely distraught over Snow White's death at the end. While the trope of a character dying only to come back has been done to death, no pun intended, back in 1937, the outcome was probably much less predictable. I also love those evil-looking eagles, and how you think they're siding with the evil queen, but really, they're just indifferent to everything, continuing to smile evilly when she falls to her death. And the animation looks amazing. It's the film that introduced Disney's iconic aesthetic, and it stood the test of time very well, even putting in details like the shine in the jewels the dwarfs mine. The songs are also quite nice to listen to, with the Hi-Ho song being the most memorable. Overall, it's a pretty good movie, and I can see why it's remembered as important historically, and deserves its place in the National Film Registry. But to me personally, it's not as amazing as it is groundbreaking, unlike say Toy Story. Meet the Robinsons remains an underrated movie, and most of my thoughts from the Disney CGI ranking video remain intact. Despite overly fast pacing, it does feature good animation, hilarious side characters, and a fantastically executed message. I don't have much to add, so I'll reiterate my thoughts about how great the ending is. I love all the subtlety of it. Wilbur takes Louis back to see his mother as promised, despite knowing he's risking his existence for it.
while Louis eventually reconsiders, realising that allowing himself to be taken in, he achieved a huge future and family. He's been hung on the past for so long, but ultimately learns to move forward in life, and also helps to improve Goop's future before returning to the science fair. And when the businessman tells him he has a bright future ahead of him, he sees Lucille, Bud, and Franny standing in front of him, showing that his future is literally right in front of him. This is the definition of keep moving forward. Meet the Robinsons is still a flawed, but ambitious and intriguing movie. Winnie the Pooh is such a charming movie. It is more grounded in story structure than the many adventures, and I've heard some people say it's a little disjointed in terms of structure, but I disagree. There are 3 different storylines in the movie: Pooh looking for honey, Eeyore losing his tail, and everyone thinking Christopher Robin was kidnapped by a Baxan. But they do all link together, and are prominent throughout the movie, although the last doesn't really come in until the second act. I've also heard people complain about the short runtime, but I honestly don't care that much. I think it uses its runtime quite well, and it's hard to think of a scene that doesn't move the story forward. And honestly, it's just such a comforting movie. I love the characters, Pooh included. Pooh is a character that you just can't hate. Well, unless the public domain turns him into a serial killer. And I like that even though he is so lovable, he's also flawed and makes mistakes. He manages to be quite naive, but not to the point of becoming annoying. And over the course of the movie, he does make some smart choices, such as using the words of the book to get everyone out of the hole, and also proves to be quite selfless, giving up eating honey with Al to get Eeyore's tail back to him, being rewarded with a huge pot of honey by Christopher Robin for his selflessness. And the movie also has a lot of funny moments, my favourite one being when they all fall down the hole and Piglet has to get them out with a rope, only to cut it up and then state he cannot not.
Not?
Who's there?
Pooh?
Pooh who?
No!
But I'll let you watch the rest of the scene for itself. And it also has some good songs, my favourites being the Baxan song for its interesting use of chalk-like visuals, representing them drawing out their visions of what the Baxan does. And Everything is Honey, which has a nice rhythm, and showcases the point where Pooh is so desperate for honey that he hallucinates a world made of it, with some genuinely great animation. Winnie the Pooh is a funny and heartwarming movie from Disney. The Emperor's New Groove is one of my favourite Disney movies, primarily because it goes almost all the way with its light-hearted tone. It mostly doesn't take itself too seriously, apart from the misunderstanding part, which does take itself a bit too seriously and feels out of place. And fitting in with the light-hearted tone, the film is often very funny, the best scenes being those with Kronk, especially when he hums his own theme music while disposing of Kuzco's body. And another standout would be when Kuzco and Portia try to get to the capital before Kronk and Yzma. I also think Kuzco has a good character arc, having been spoiled from a young age and becoming entitled and selfish as a result of it. He initially seems to have no compassion for others, but then ends up showing genuine humanity, like when he, without thinking, saves Portia and then tries to deny it. Over the course of the movie, Kuzco realises his selfishness and tries to better himself, and also provides for the people around him, including Portia's family. The Emperor's New Groove is a really enjoyable movie, with a lot of great humour and superb character development. The Fox and the Hound is such an underrated movie, and I'd like to call it an amazing movie, but there are a few things that hold it back, as frustrating as it might be. Some of the voices for the characters can be distracting, especially in how they sound exactly like characters from previous Disney movies, such as Tigger, Piglet, and the Sheriff of Nottingham. And yeah, I know it's the same voice actors, but it doesn't change how distracting it sounds. Another thing that's kind of jarring to me is when Chief falls off the railroad track bridge and they try to make you think he died, but he actually just broke his leg. But in spite of that, this is a really good movie. Pretty amazing that I considered it to be Disney's best animated film since Fantasia, 41 years prior. I would go on to rewatch better films that came out during the Renaissance period, but that's besides the point. The relationship between Todd and Copper is rather touching, and I like the way it progresses, with it becoming more complicated and conflicting as they get older. The outcome of them protecting each other in the climax is kind of predictable, but their final goodbye is poignant enough to make up for it. The relationship between Todd and Tweed is very poignant, including the love they have for each other, and that downright depressing scene in which she reluctantly takes him to the game reserve due to him no longer being safe with her. And I like that the movie has the bravery to stick to this, rather than having him return home just for the sake of a happily ever after. The Fox and the Hound is a welcomely dark and rather sad, but also very emotionally gripping movie, and it's a shame it's not frequently talked about. Frozen is still a very good movie to me, though my opinion hasn't changed too much. It still features good songs, intriguing characters, amazing animation, and smartly executed morals. I will say that I initially hated Do You Want to Build a Snowman, and I'm still not big on it, but this time around, it's not awful. And as I mentioned before, it does at least move the story forward, unlike Fixer Upper. Something I will mention that I didn't before is how relatable Elsa's arc can be, one that can resonate with people who shut people out for fear of hurting them, with Elsa figuring out how to control her emotions, in turn controlling her ice powers, and not having to shut Anna out. I can't currently think of anything else particularly new to say, but I will say that while there was a lot of hype for it for over a year after it came out, I can definitely understand that hype. Zootopia is still a very good movie to me, with well executed themes, creative world building, amazing animation, intriguing characters, and a lot of great jokes and emotional depth, even if the flaws regarding the twist villain, nudist colony scene, and the argument between Judy and Nick still stand. I'll take this opportunity to expand on Judy and Nick's character arcs, which I think are really well handled, and I think work off each other superbly. You have Judy, the ambitious bunny cop, who wants to reduce the tension between prey and predators, and Nick, the con artist fox, who once aspired to be a cop, but faced discrimination and felt that taking the predictable path of con artist was the only option. I like that Nick initially helps Judy just to seize her evidence of him admitting to tax evasion, but over the course of the movie actually seeks to help her, seeing an opportunity to prove that he can be a good cop as well, as had been his desire as a kid. Though the argument between Judy and Nick has a predictable outcome, I like that she is shown to be flawed, with a suggestion that predatory biology is responsible for the savage epidemic, causing negativity and tension, which had been the opposite of her intentions, and an error that she eventually fixes with Nick's help. Although Judy had expressed pessimism about Nick, and Nick had expressed pessimism about becoming a cop, they both see the good in those respective people or careers by the end. Zootopia remains a stunning, funny, emotional, and thought-provoking movie. Aladdin is still a really good movie, and I stand by Robin Williams as the genie being the best part of it. As well as Williams' hilarious and energetic vocal performance, the genie is a great character, managing to work as both a comic relief side character and an important character to the story, as well as seamlessly working in a more emotional and sympathetic side to him. While I've said most of what I'd like to say about this film in my Disney Renaissance ranking, the characters of Aladdin and the genie, the songs and the animation, I'll take this opportunity to talk about some of the other characters. While Jafar manages to be an entertaining and quite threatening villain, there's the more likeable characters in Jasmine and the Sultan. I like how Jasmine wants to marry who she wants, rather than who the Sultan wants her to. And even though the Sultan is trying to force her into a marriage, you understand that he wants someone to take care of her when he's gone. It's a situation where you understand the desires and motivations of both characters, and the Sultan's decision to change the law so Jasmine may marry Aladdin is superb character development. Aladdin is still a really good movie, and there ain't ever been a character like Robin Williams' genie. Mulan is still a really good movie, and I stand by everything I said in my Disney Renaissance ranking video. For this video, I'll say that Mulan should be a makeup remover, given how quickly she removed her own makeup. Wow, not only did she save China, but she also showed skills in quick and effective makeup removal. And the movie still maintains the superb action scenes, characters, songs, balanced tone, and compelling themes and messages I mentioned before. A very good movie. Encanto is a fantastic movie. The writing, the voice acting, the music, the visuals, the themes, all brilliant. I find Mirabel an intriguing protagonist, one who, although disappointed in not having a power like the rest of her family, is still determined to keep the magic of her family and their house alive, and, literally, trying to fix the cracks in her family. I also like her grandmother Alma, and her desire to preserve the family magic, but ultimately coming to take responsibility for not exercising restraint in doing so. And the songs are mostly fantastic. They're mostly memorable, they move the story forward, and the aesthetic is so stunning and creative. Encanto may well have the most aesthetically creative and pleasing song numbers of any Disney movie. Encanto is a fantastic movie, and one of my favourite animated Disney movies. My thoughts on Moana haven't changed much, but it remains a fantastic film from Disney, with stunning animation, amazing music, and memorable characters. For this video, I'll go more into the arcs of the two main characters, Moana and Maui. Moana is a great protagonist, and I like how even though she is ambitious, she doesn't always know what to do or where to go, and frequently makes mistakes that she overcomes over the course of the movie. And I like how Maui had wanted acceptance that his parents had never given him, turning to moral measures to keep it up, but eventually overcomes the trauma and helps Moana fulfill her goal. They have superb goals and superb arcs. Moana remains one of my favourite animated Disney movies. I still love Wreck-It Ralph, though I think as I've seen it so many times and put together thoughts, some even before the two viewings for this and the Disney CGI ranking videos, it's hard to think what to say that I haven't already said. It still maintains creativity, intriguing world building, likeable and relatable protagonists with superb character arcs, subtle anti-discrimination message, great humour, creative art style, and genuine poignancy, all of which I mentioned before. So, what can I add for this? I smell burning. Oh ye gods! The arcade is ruined! Shouldn't have plugged so many games into the surge, Mr. Litwalk. I'm joking. There are things about the world building that don't quite add up, but they're infrequent and far and wide, so it doesn't matter too much. The Little Mermaid is still fantastic. The animation, the characters, the music, the story, it's all brilliant. I don't really have much more to bring up that I didn't already mention in my Disney Renaissance ranking video, although I will add to my praise of the songs by saying I like the rhythm of the song Kiss the Girl and the way the scene is built up. But besides what I brought up here and in my Disney Renaissance ranking video, it's still a fantastic movie to me, and it's understandable why it kickstarted the Disney Renaissance. Most of what I said about The Hunchback of Notre Dame in my Renaissance ranking video still stands, although there is a much fatter margin between this film and The Lion King this time around. But I think rewatching The Lion King and The Hunchback of Notre Dame back to back has made me realise why the latter's tone feels so inconsistent. And it's because the dark moments in Hunchback go so hard. Not that I'm complaining, I'm glad there's a Disney film that would go that hard. And the light moments are so overly cartoony. That's why the tonal shifts are so jarring. The Lion King does go pretty hard in a lot of scenes too, and has comic relief as well, but it's not overly cartoony, especially when it does journey into more serious territory, and when they put jokes in between, they feel more natural, because they don't go too hard with the cartoony nature. As such, The Lion King can maintain a balanced tone in a way The Hunchback of Notre Dame couldn't. I said in my Renaissance ranking video that the gargoyles had some purpose to the story, though I'm not entirely sure about that. They only really take down the guards in the climax, something that Quasimodo also does. I don't find the gargoyles that annoying, but I do hate how they give Quasi false hope about winning Esmeralda, only for him to witness her kissing Phoebus. Gargoyles, you sadistic pricks, how could you? But my god, is the film amazing otherwise. It still maintains the compelling themes, fantastic music, and memorable characters that I've mentioned before. If not for the messy tone, it might be in the top 2 at least, but as is, it's a worthy number 5 spot. Fantasia might be the most timeless movie ever made. It takes a very promising concept of applying animation to classical pieces of music, and really delivers on that idea. While I do think some sequences are better than others, all of them are good at the very least, with Night on Bald Mountain teamed up with Ave Maria being my favourite one, with the dark visuals really assisting the great combination. This is one of those rare instances where it felt like Disney was leaning more towards the adult crowd than the kid crowd, but I think kids of a certain age can enjoy it too for its interesting colours and the presence of Mickey Mouse in the Sorcerer's Apprentice segment. At some point I should probably do a video where I rank every segment in both Fantasia films from worst to best. There's definitely something to say about each of them, even the weaker ones. But for now I'll say, Fantasia is a visually stunning and intriguing masterpiece that I'm praying will not be butchered by a live action remake. Lilo and Stitch has honestly gotten better with age. I liked it as a kid, revisiting it as an adult, it's amazing. The film hits both its emotional and comedic moments fantastically, feeling balanced in tone and providing so much subtlety in its emotional depth. Like how Lilo believes Pudge controls the weather, having become traumatized following the death of her parents in a storm, and Stitch reading The Ugly Duckling and learning of its message, before later feeling unwanted and coming across a family of ducklings. Lilo and Stitch are fantastic protagonists. Despite being different species, they both struggle to fit in and can be violent and aggressive at times, but they understand each other. Lilo's relationship with her older sister and guardian nanny is really poignant. You can see that they love each other, as well as the stressfulness of their situation, in that Nanny has to take care of her, as well as trying to prove herself as a good guardian to a social worker, and later having to find a new job. And there's the social worker himself, and while he could be considered an antagonist, he's ultimately just doing his job, and there are scenes where he sees the difficulty of the situation and how hard Nanny is trying to prove herself. Despite being a movie about aliens, Lilo and Stitch manages to feel very realistic, featuring characters in some very real situations, and even giving depth to the alien characters as well. Lilo and Stitch is funny, emotionally gripping, well animated, and features some fantastic characters, and just has to be near the top of the list. As mentioned in my Renaissance ranking, The Lion King, while not the best Disney animated movie, is the biggest and grandest. The animation, the music, the voice acting, the tension, it's all fantastic. There is something I want to call more attention to. I didn't talk about this much in the Renaissance ranking, but I will here, and that's the story, which is really well done. Simba has a superb character arc over the course of the movie, going from trying to shape up to be a great king, to fleeing with guilt upon being gaslit into believing he killed his dad, to realizing he can't change the past, but needs to confront and learn from it to save his friends and family, to finally taking his position as the king of Pride Rock. And Hans Zimmer's music showcases this to some extent, particularly through the triumphant music when Simba runs back to Pride Rock, and when he climbs to the top of the mountain, showing how far he's come. I like how Scar and the hyenas, while all villains, have different motivations. Scar is selfish and greedy, and will do anything to keep his position as king, even when others suffer. While the hyenas merely want good food sources, so much that they'll turn to evil measures to get it. And to some extent, they both achieve their goal at some point. Scar kills Mufasa and sends Simba away and becomes king, which was his goal. And the hyenas, upon realizing his betrayal of them, eat him alive. I'm not entirely sure what happened to the hyenas, but there's a chance they burned in the fire, considering they don't reappear after that. So if that happened, you could say Scar and the hyenas both achieved their different goals, but ended up losing their lives in the process. But ultimately, The Lion King teaches several great morals, primarily in how only certain situations call for people to be brave, rather than actively looking for danger. But also how you should learn from your past instead of running from it. And yeah, everything I said in my Renaissance rankings still stands. Though, admittedly, while I still hate the cover of Can You Feel the Love Tonight that plays in the movie, the cover during the credits by Elton John isn't that bad, to be fair. The Lion King remains a fantastic film, but there is one better animated movie from Disney. Yep, Beauty and the Beast is still phenomenal. Despite all the Stockholm schmockholm people would like to claim, it's one of my all-time favourite movies, and my favourite animated Disney movie, and it's gotten even better on my most recent viewing. While I covered it in my Disney Renaissance ranking video, I don't want to just gloss over it. I'd like to take the opportunity to shine light on even more notes of praise, maybe even elaborate further on some of my old points, and also say that upon rewatching both this and The Silence of the Lambs, Beauty and the Beast should have won Best Picture. Something I will mention that I didn't before was Belle's relationship with her father Maurice, which, like the majority of the movie, I really like. While the town sees both of them as odd, the two support each other's interests, and when Belle takes Maurice's place as the Beast's prisoner, he frequently objects to it and then tries to get help setting her free afterwards. This should have been Disney's tweet about family being there for you, instead of this laughable misfire. A nitpick I have with the film that I should have mentioned before is how the Beast's singing voice sounds incredibly different to his speaking voice. But it's only for one verse, so it's only a minor problem. I mentioned how great the songs were in the Renaissance ranking, and I want to talk here about how great the instrumental scores are. They're absolutely majestic, and they fit every scene. The combination of eeriness and sadness to the opening theme, the build-up in the music as Belle enters the West Wing, the tension-filled music as she tries to fight the wolves, and the highly emotional music at the end when the Beast dies, only to come back as the prince, and the two get married. One you may have missed, which may be exclusive to the special edition version which I watched, is the theme at the end of the credits. Like all the other instrumental themes, it's beautiful to listen to, and the tribute to Howard Ashman is so poignant. And I'd like to second it. Thank you, Howard, for giving a mermaid her voice and a beast his soul. Your music brought pleasure to millions, and we will be forever grateful. Not long ago, I watched the 2023 drama film Past Lives. I thought it was an amazing film, with sublime writing and direction from Celine Song, and performances from Greta Lee and Teo Yu. It showcased a really interesting and poignant conflict in Nora's longtime friendship with Hae Sung, and the representation of her youth, and her husband Arthur's representation of the life path she chose, with the film exploring the interesting concept of how people wonder what could happen if they chose a different path in life. The reason I bring this up is because the film only got 2 Academy Award nominations, Best Picture and Best Original Screenplay. And hardly anyone is talking about this. But everyone is talking about 2 specific women not being nominated in 2 specific categories. And I'm going to look at this situation and throw my own hat into the ring about what areas I believe to be valid and what not to be valid.
Oh, they got this all screwed up.
So, the 96th Academy Award nominations came out on the 23rd of January, and in the hours succeeding the announcement, people took to social media to express their thoughts. But the topic that broke the internet was regarding Barbie's nominations. As expected, Ryan Gosling was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for playing Ken. Margot Robbie, however, was not nominated for Best Actress. But do you want to know the funny part? People claimed that Ryan Gosling was nominated at the Oscars, but not Margot Robbie or Greta Gerwig, and called this ironic given that the film is about abolishing the patriarchy. So, does this claim have any weight? It is true that Margot Robbie was not nominated for Best Actress, and Greta Gerwig for Best Director. Saying they should have been nominated in these categories is one thing. To say that they received no nominations is simply not true, however. Robbie was nominated for Best Picture as one of the producers, while Gerwig was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay, something that most people seem to ignore, either because they don't care enough to read into it, or because they don't regard being a producer or a screenwriter as proper careers, whichever the case is really dismissive, honestly. The one that makes even less sense to criticise, however, is Margot Robbie's snub as quote-unquote sexist. And there are many reasons for this. First of all, she wasn't snubbed in favour of Ryan Gosling. They competed in different categories, him in Best Supporting Actor and her in Best Actress. Secondly, she was snubbed for Best Actress, a category for which men cannot be nominated. And frankly, some of the responses have been quite belittling. In particular, these ones from Mary McNamara. If only Barbie had done a little time as a sex worker, or barely survived becoming the next victim in a mass murder plot, or stood accused of shoving Ken out the dream house's top window. These are all references to the characters the Best Actress nominees played, and not only is this disrespectful to the nominees, but considering that the middle one is a reference to Lily Gladstone's role in Killers of the Flower Moon, in which they played real-life Osage woman Molly Kyle, who survived the Osage Indian murders, it comes off as disrespectful not just to the victims, but also the survivors. Apparently no one in the Academy was actually listening when Ferrera's Gloria delivered her now famous monologue about why it feels impossible to be a woman. I mean, that's a bold claim given that they did nominate America Ferrera for Best Supporting Actress for that monologue. Gerwig was nominated, alongside her husband Noah Baumbach, for Adapted Screenplay, but the irony of her being snubbed again for directing the film that featured that scene is breathtaking. I agree that Gerwig should have been nominated for Best Director, and it is good that McNamara acknowledged her screenplay nomination, but she would also be more likely to get that one, given that there are 2 screenplay categories and only 1 directing category. But on the topic of Lily Gladstone and America Ferrera being overshadowed, so while everyone is talking about Robbie's snub for Best Actress and Gerwig's snub for Best Director, there are various achievements, including milestones, and snubs that are being overshadowed in favour of these. The main one, and one of the only 2 that are getting some recognition, is Lily Gladstone's nomination for Best Actress for Killers of the Flower Moon, making them not only the first Native American to be nominated for the award, but also the first out non-binary person to be nominated for an Oscar in any category. While there have been non-binary Oscar winners and nominees in the past, including Sam Smith and Elliot Page, they were not out as non-binary at the time of their nominations. Lily Gladstone, however, was. This means that for the first time in history, the Academy have knowingly nominated a non-binary person, and as a non-binary person myself, I see this as a win. However, there is an area in this situation that I feel I need to address, and I will come back to this later. As mentioned earlier, Latino actress America Ferrera was nominated for Best Supporting Actress for Barbie, which has been similarly overshadowed, and very few people have called attention to her achievement. And then there's the other 5 actors of colour who have been recognised: Danielle Brooks in The Colour Purple, Sterling K. Brown and Jeffrey Wright in American Fiction, Coleman Domingo in Rustin, who was also out as gay, and Davine Joy Randolph in The Holdovers. But again, these nominations have been overshadowed by 2 white women not being nominated in 2 specific categories. And then there's the film Past Lives, which hardly anyone is talking about. It received nominations for Best Picture and Best Original Screenplay, and nothing else. So while Celine's song was nominated for Best Original Screenplay, much like Greta Gerwig, she received no other nominations. And leading actors Greta Lee and Teo Yu were not nominated at all, but hardly anyone is saying that they were snubbed. Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie miss out on Best Director and Best Actress, and people claim they got no nominations whatsoever, while Greta Lee and Teo Yu do get no nominations whatsoever, and no one bats an eye. There seems to be a pattern here, doesn't there? Categories being dominated by white people has been an issue since the beginning of the Oscars. At the 87th and 88th ceremonies, every acting nominee was white. And while criticising this is valid, it comes off as hypocritical to then overshadow the nominations of actors of colour, in favour of complaining about one white actress not getting one. There is a flip side to some of this, however, and some of this stems from a lack of diversity in not just award shows, but also the film industry in general, and this leads to the last part of the video. While I have been addressing my frustration with how people have complained about a white woman not being nominated in a category for which men cannot be nominated, I want to clarify that this video is not made to undermine the talent of white women, or white people in general. Mainly because I think that's a bit of a shitty thing to do, but also because it's not the solution to one of the main problems that the film industry in general is facing at the moment. While it is ridiculous to claim that Greta Gerwig got no nominations for Barbie, it is valid to be upset about her not being nominated for Best Director. Ever since the start of the Academy Awards, the Best Director category, along with most non-gender categories, has been dominated by men. And the number of times a woman has been nominated for Best Director in the category's history currently sits at just 9. With 2 nominations for Jane Campion, and one each for Lena Wertmuller, Sofia Coppola, Catherine Bigelow, Greta Gerwig, Chloe Zhao, Emerald Fennell, and Justine Triet, whose nomination this year has also been overshadowed by the outrage of Greta Gerwig's Best Director snub. Of these 9 nominations, Catherine Bigelow, Chloe Zhao, and Jane Campion have each won once. Coming back to Lily Gladstone's nomination, while an out non-binary person getting an Oscar nomination for the first time is a win, the Best Actress category isn't the best one for them to be nominated in. There's been a wide discussion about whether gendered acting categories should be abolished, and as a non-binary person, it's one where I can understand both sides of the argument. On one hand, gender-neutral categories are good for allowing non-binary actors to be recognised for their acting talents without being misgendered. On the other hand, as mentioned previously, most non-gender categories are dominated by men, which would likely end up being the case if the acting categories were merged into one. I think the solution to this problem would be to keep the gender categories and introduce a new category, or categories, for non-binary actors, thus allowing non-binary actors to get recognised without being misgendered, and actresses to get recognition without fear of being outnumbered by male actors. And while the Academy, and most award shows, have been pretty bad at diverse representation, I don't just think they're to blame for the lack of recognitions for films made by women, people of colour, and LGBTQ+ people. Much of the problem is the film industry not giving these people enough work. For all the talent of a lot of straight white men out there, and a fair number of them using their privilege to give these people opportunities, they are much more hired. And, much like what happens at the end of Barbie, I think the playing field needs to be levelled, to allow everyone the same opportunities, regardless of gender, ethnicity, or sexuality. But also in some cases, allow certain groups of people to tell their own stories, which can not only open the doors for them more, but also allow a story to be told from a more informed point of view. Tom Ford's fantastic insight into how difficult being gay was, and still is, in A Single Man. Jordan Peele's amazing satire of racism in Get Out, and Patricia Cardozo's phenomenal message of encouraging women to love their bodies and real women have curves. While the industry is making small steps in becoming more diverse, we are not at the point of it being fully diverse yet, and as such, shining a light on the work of minority groups and showcasing their talent is important, as this will hopefully help to level the playing field and thus allow equal opportunities for everyone. Hello everyone. I'm now making a new series of videos talking about controversial movies. This will consist of movies that have caused discussion due to their content and or their production, and me determining whether this is warranted, or at the very least, understandable. For these videos, I will be setting out a structure for each segment. 1. Why is the movie controversial? 2. Is the controversy understandable and or warranted? 3. What do I think of the movie as a whole? And 4. Is it worth watching? So it won't just be a summary of the controversy. I will also be providing my own opinion on the movie, and also whether or not I believe it to be worth watching. But keep in mind, aside from the first segments, these videos are just my opinion. You're allowed to disagree with them. You may believe the controversy is warranted when I don't, or not warranted when I do. You may not like a movie I do, or like a movie I don't, and all these are perfectly fine. And since a lot of these movies are controversial for disturbing topics, you may want to click on another video if the topics mentioned in the opening of each video are triggering for you, as I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. Doing so would defeat the purpose of the video. I will censor explicit content as to not run into any trouble with YouTube censors, but I won't censor discussion of the topics themselves. So, let's start this series with Stanley Kubrick's 1971 dystopian crime film, Clockwork Orange. Released in 1971 in America and 1972 in Britain, A Clockwork Orange was a box office success, grossing $114 million worldwide. It was also the most popular film of 1972 in France, with over 7 million admissions. Despite its financial success and recognition at several award shows, A Clockwork Orange polarised critics and was highly controversial due to its graphic violence. In its USA original release in 1972, A Clockwork Orange was given an X rating. After Kubrick removed 30 seconds of sexually explicit footage, the re-release was given an R rating. New Yorker film critic Pauline Kael called the film pornographic because of how it dehumanized Alex's victims while highlighting his suffering. She also noted the extended scene in which Billy Boy's gang strip and rape a woman, claiming it was included to arouse the audience. In countries such as Ireland, Singapore, South Africa, South Korea, Brazil, Malta, and the Canadian provinces of Alberta and Nova Scotia, the film was banned either immediately or shortly after release, but eventually released in cinemas years to decades later. In Brazil, it was released in 1978 as a version with black dots covering the genitals and breasts of the actors in nude scenes. And in South Africa, it was released in 1984 with one cut. In Malta, the film was unbanned in 2000 and shown in local cinemas. The film was brought up during the investigation on the rape and murder of Paulina Demska in 2022, when the accused attacker compared himself to Alex. But the most notable and notorious controversy surrounding the film was in Britain, where, despite the film being released uncut in 1971, the authorities considered the film's sexual violence extreme. In March 1972, the film was accused of influencing a 14-year-old boy to kill a classmate. It was also accused of influencing a 16-year-old boy to murder an elderly homeless person. The boy pleaded guilty after telling police that friends have told him of the film, and the beating up of an old boy like this one. Roger Gray, for the defence, told the court that the link between this crime and sensational literature, particularly A Clockwork Orange, is established beyond reasonable doubt. The film was also blamed for a rape, in which the attacker's son Singing in the Rain is singing in the rape. Following his family receiving death threats and protesters outside their home, Kubrick asked Warner Bros. To withdraw the film from British release. He stated, "To try and fasten any responsibility on art as the cause of life seems to me to put the case the wrong way round. Art consists of reshaping life, but it does not create life, nor cause life. Furthermore, to attribute powerful suggestive qualities to a film is at odds with the scientifically accepted view that, even after deep hypnosis, in a post-hypnotic state, people cannot be made to do things which are at odds with their natures." From then until Kubrick's death in 1999, the film was very difficult to watch in the UK. In 1993, then Cinema Scala was successfully sued by Warner Bros. For an unauthorised screening of the film, and went bankrupt as a result, later being turned into a nightclub. The same year, Channel 4 broadcast an episode of Without Walls, titled Forbidden Fruit, which was a documentary about the film's withdrawal in Britain, in which its host, Tony Parsons, travelled to Paris to see the film. After Kubrick's death in 1999, the film was re-released theatrically, on VHS, and on DVD, and has remained legal ever since. So, what's my opinion of the controversy? I'm mostly going to be addressing the controversy the film caused in Britain for this part, but for the most part, I don't think the controversy with this film was warranted. The film was rated X, which prohibited anyone under 18 from seeing it. This was above the age of the boys who were investigated and or convicted of killing. I can understand not initially wanting to release the film on physical media. The film came out prior to the Video Recordings Act 1984. Before this Act of Parliament, home videos did not need to have age ratings on them, meaning that anyone could buy them, and led to the term video nasties to describe films based on VHS that had been criticised for their violent content. I can see how the film would have had a harmful impact on those under 18, and frankly you'd have to be insane to give this film any lower than the equivalent of an 18 certificate. So not releasing it on VHS before 1984 would have seemed like a wise decision. But the film was rated X for a reason. It was inappropriate for anyone under 18. And it very easily could have continued to play in cinemas where there was a legal obligation to classify the film, especially given how successful the film was in the UK. But even when Parliament passed the Video Recordings Act 1984, the film remained banned, despite the fact that it could be released on VHS with an 18 certificate, preventing anyone under that age from buying it. And if you want to make the argument that a parent could buy it and their kid could watch it, to that I say, parents need to keep an eye on what their kids watch, and not give them access to films and shows that are inappropriate. Regarding Pauline Kael's review of the film, I do agree that the film dehumanises Alex's victims. But I think the reason for this is that the film is from Alex's perspective. And from his perspective, none of the people in his life are humans to him, whether victims or not. Even the girls he had the consensual three-way with are not real people to him, merely sexual objects for his own pleasure. I really don't think the Billy Boy gang rape scene was added in to arouse the audience. You'd have to be fucked in the head to be aroused by the sight of a woman being forcefully stripped and raped. However, while I don't find the scene gratuitous, I do think it could have been cut down, as I don't need to sit through a minute and 20 seconds of a woman being stripped and raped to comprehend that she was raped. Looking at much of the controversy with the film, that's the one part that I do agree with to some extent. Otherwise, I don't think the controversy is warranted, and I feel like Kubrick withdrew the film from British viewership under pressure from protesters and death threats. Adults have the capacity to determine that violence is not gleeful, and A Clockwork Orange does not glorify it in any way. Alex is written as a villain, and not someone you're supposed to root for. He does celebrate his acts of violence, but that's because he's a sadist. While teens are more impressionable, and may get the wrong message from watching it, it was never meant to be viewed by them. You don't want impressionable teens to watch films that might indirectly influence them to commit acts of violence. Classify it with an 18 certificate. Don't let them into screenings. Don't sell them physical copies. And if you're a parent or guardian, keep your physical copies out of their reach. So, now that I've voiced my thoughts regarding the controversy, what do I think of the film as a whole? I first watched A Clockwork Orange when I was 18. At the time, I considered it a disturbing but thought-provoking masterpiece that commented on what could happen if we let violence and misogyny go unnoticed. 5 years later, it's an opinion I stand by, but there's more to it than just that. A Clockwork Orange is about dominance. It's something that every major character in the film craves at some point. The film's protagonist Alex DeLarge is a sadist, and Malcolm McDowell is phenomenal in the role, really representing the creepy, psychopathic, and overall despicable personality of the character. He and his fellow droogs take pride in drinking Milk Plus, this being milk laced with drugs, and beating up and/or raping strangers. But Alex is not a team player. He not only takes pride in beating up rivals, such as Billy Boy and his gang, but also wants dominance over his own gang. While he does not oppose the ideas of his fellow droogs, as shown by him asking Georgie to explain his idea for breaking into the cat lady's house, he does oppose them telling him what to do. When Dim and Georgie try to have a say in what they should and shouldn't do, Alex beats them both up. Alex is no ordinary sadist. He is a sadist who wants to build a dystopia that he has control over, having the freedom to attack or fuck whoever he wants. Humanizing villains is something that exists in a lot of films and TV shows, and I think it works really well when not overdone. A notable example would be Blue Velvet's Frank Booth, who, much like Alex, is a drug-handling rapist. While an evil, frightening, and irredeemable character, Frank is shown to have vulnerable emotions, genuinely tearing up when seeing his victim Dorothy sing Blue Velvet. Humanizing villains works to show that even though they are capable of actions that would be deemed inhuman, they are ultimately human beings, and it reminds us that we as humans are capable of the barbaric actions that these evil characters, and sometimes film depictions of real people, commit. While the film does a good job at showing Alex's evil and sadistic tendencies, it also humanizes him. While Alex sees everyone around him as inhuman, he does care for his pet snake, and treats it more humanely than the humans around him. It reminds us that Alex is indeed a human being, and brings us back to the scary part of reality that sadistic people like him do indeed exist. But as well as Alex, the government also want dominance. They established the Ludovico technique program, designed to rehabilitate criminals. Their real goal? To remove violent tendencies from real people so that they can put violence into their own hands. When Alex completes the program, he is still evil, but seemingly unable to act on it, not fighting back against an actor who taunts and attacks him, and becoming ill at the sight of a naked woman. The prison chaplain had opposed the program, voicing his belief that good comes from within. When Alex returns home, he finds his room has been rented out, and he is later attacked by the homeless man he beat up years prior. In Alex's quest to control a dystopia he was building up, he ended up becoming vulnerable to the dystopia, not only being attacked by the homeless man, but also by a group of other homeless people. The homeless man had been attacked by a group of droogs. Now the leader of the droogs is being attacked by a group of homeless people. Alex is saved by two police officers, only to realise they are his former droogs, Dim and Georgie. They drive him to the countryside, and frequently beat him while trying to drown him in a bathtub. In today's times, when police brutality has been more publicised, Dim and Georgie becoming police officers so that they have the power to hurt people is a plot point that has aged like fine wine, and adds to the theme of dominance, and how the authorities want to put violence into their own hands, while wanting control over the actions and thoughts of the public. When Alex stumbles across the house of Frank Alexander, the author who he crippled and raped the wife of years before, Mr. Alexander recognises him from the newspapers, and intends to use him as a political weapon to oppose the Ludovico technique. Alex sings Singing in the Rain in the bathtub, giving Mr. Alexander PTSD from the attack, and prompting him to hypocritically use the Ludovico technique against Alex, which causes him to attempt suicide. I've heard a theory that Alex only pretends to be vulnerable, which makes sense. Why else would he sing the same song he sung while committing sadistic acts of violence? It also adds to the film's theme of dominance. Alex has to pretend to be vulnerable as to not be returned to prison, being shaped into a robot released by the government. The government institutionalized Mr. Alexander following this, and the minister, not wanting to risk losing his credibility, offers Alex a job, provided that Alex cooperates with his election campaign. In order to survive, Alex must remain a robot of the government, but his contemplations of violence and vivid thoughts of sexual intercourse imply that he also has the freedom to return to his wicked ways. While not becoming the dictator of a dystopia like he'd hoped, he will maintain some dominance and be able to act on his sadistic thoughts, albeit being beneath the government's dominance. Released over 5 decades ago, A Clockwork Orange is what I would describe as a warning for the future. A warning about dominance and the different people that seek it. A warning about how criminals cannot necessarily be rehabilitated. A warning about how we should pay close mind to the ideologies of politicians in case they were to find their way to the highest authority levels and use their position to inflict dominance and try to silence those who try to expose them. So, with all this said, let's go on to the final question regarding this piece of controversial cinema.
Oh, that's why they call it that.
A Clockwork Orange is definitely not for everyone, and certainly not for under 18s. That said, if you're over 18 and comfortable with graphic and/or disturbing content, I would strongly recommend this movie. It's a highly unpleasant, but also very interesting film, and a superb commentary on dominance and abuse of power. I've thought strongly of it ever since I saw it, and hopefully, you will too.
Well, here's another Best Picture ranking video. This time, I'll be covering the 2000s winners. As with before, I haven't seen all of the 2000 nominees, but this is just a ranking of the winners, and my opinions on whether the winners deserve to win is based on the films I have seen from their respective years. Here's a list of the nominees I have not seen. So, let's get started. Boy, people weren't kidding when they said Brokeback Mountain was a far superior movie. Crash is such a misguided mess of a film. I liked the movie when I was younger, and even included it in the lyrics of my We Didn't Start the Pictures music video. But believe me, I will not be including it in the new version. Crash reminds me a little bit of Pocahontas, in how both films seem like they're trying to shine a light on racial issues, but do a horrible job at it. I do think Crash is a little better, but that's not saying much. The movie is not 100% awful. There are two scenes that I think work quite well. One is the scene in which John Ryan saves Christine, who he previously molested, from a burning car. Although she is understandably hesitant due to how he behaved previously, he eventually does manage to set her free. It's quite a thought-provoking and tension-filled scene, and it makes you wonder if John does earn redemption through doing it or not. The other is the scene in which Daniel is almost shot by Farhad, but his daughter runs into his arms just beforehand, and he tearfully and frantically checks her for bullet wounds, only to discover she's okay. Adding on from the somewhat intriguing relationship the two have, it does have quite a lot of tension to it, and it is reassuring when we find out she actually survived. Mostly because of these two scenes, some good performances from Don Cheadle, Matt Dillon and Tandy Way Newton, and some genuinely quite good editing, I can ultimately put it above Dances with Wolves and Unforgiven, but that in no way qualifies as a recommendation. The film is very unsubtle and misguided in its approach to racism. From the beginning, you have black friends Anthony and Peter talking about the racism they experience, only to then hold Gene and Rick at gunpoint and steal their car. They do the same thing later on in the movie, only this time it's owned by Cameron. The film doesn't even really address any sub-themes of racism, or have an insightful commentary on racism. And it's full of one-dimensional characters who I barely remember anything about. Sandra Bullock plays Jean, whose car is robbed, and who near the end of the movie falls down the stairs. Bullock isn't terrible in the role, but she really isn't given an interesting character to work with, and as a result, her performance, though through no fault of her own, gets bogged down. Many people say Brokeback Mountain should have won Best Picture over this movie, and while I do love Brokeback Mountain, and I agree it was way better than this misfire, an opinion I have always had, I would have given it to Syriana, a very intriguing thriller with a fantastic performance from George Clooney. The best part of No Country for Old Men is easily Javier Bardem as the villain. He genuinely brings a chilling and/or threatening presence to every scene he's in, and the fact that he rarely emotes adds to that chilling nature. As shown by performances like this, and Kevin Spacey's performance in Seven, it works much better with villains than with heroes. But is the movie as a whole deserving of the Best Picture Oscar? I don't think so. The first half of the movie is just kind of slow and tedious, except for the stuff with Bardem. But it does pick up and become more intriguing in the second half, with the chase between Moss and Chigurh being legitimately intense. And Josh Brolin and Tommy Lee Jones provide good performances, even if not quite holding a candle to the brilliance of Bardem. It's a well-made movie, and Bardem absolutely deserved Best Supporting Actor. But of the Best Picture nominees I've seen from 2007, I'd put it between the brilliance of Juno and the, in my opinion, boredom of There Will Be Blood, even with Daniel Day-Lewis's fantastic performance. And yet, I don't think Juno is the best film of 2007 either. My personal choice would have been the unnominated Ratatouille, a smart, sophisticated, and artistically put together film from Brad Bird. The Hurt Locker is a great movie. The plot of the film is quite simple, but the tension that the film builds up in how anyone or anything could be deadly to the characters is mostly well done, even if it does go on slightly too long. It's a very well-made movie overall, with an intriguing script, strong technical aspects, particularly the sound, and a superb performance from Jeremy Renner. Do I think it deserved Best Picture? Whether ranking it alongside films I've seen from 2008, when it technically first came out, or 2009, when it came out in America, I don't think so. I would have given the 2009 award to Mary and Max. If you haven't seen it, watch it. It's a fantastic coming-of-age story about the touching friendship between a lonely 8-year-old girl in Australia and a 44-year-old man with Asperger's in New York. You may not want to watch it more than once, but one viewing is a fantastic experience.
Chicago is an absolute spectacle of a movie. The writing, the direction, the acting, the choreography, the editing, the cinematography, the visuals, all fantastic. A part of Chicago that I really admire is the style Rob Marshall brings to it. I like how the musical numbers in the film have the setting and aesthetic of a stage performance, which is what this movie was based on, whether they establish a character's backstory, motivations, or inner thoughts. And the cast are superb, with Catherine Zeta-Jones in particular knocking it out the park. I also think the story is really interesting, particularly the rivalry between Roxy and Velma, as well as the character of Roxy's lawyer, Billy Flynn, and how he turns his clients into celebrities to gain public support for them. A theme that remains relevant today. In fact, at the same ceremony this film won Best Picture, known paedophile Roman Polanski won Best Director, a man who has been defended frequently just because he's famous and his work is admired.
The themes of the Best Picture winner, contrasting with the criminal history of the Best Director winner.
He may be a great director, but he's also a fucking creep.
While I do consider Chicago a mind-blowing film made by a huge team of very passionate and ambitious people, I would have given Best Picture to Real Women Have Curves. While not nominated for any Oscars, it's just a brilliant film to me that, as well as being intriguing and superbly acted all the way through, also presents a hugely empowering and heartwarming message about loving your body, and has absolutely earned its place in the National Film Registry. $1 Million Baby is a very poignant movie, with superb direction and acting from Clint Eastwood, as well as fantastic performances from Hilary Swank and Morgan Freeman, the latter of whom makes for an intriguing narrator, much like he did with The Shawshank Redemption. One of the things that makes the film so great is its characters, most notably Maggie and Frankie. I love Maggie's strong ambition to become a boxer, knowing that she can convince Frankie to train her, even when he constantly refuses to train a woman. I also think Frankie has a strong character arc, going from refusing to train Maggie, to seeing the merit in her ambition and ability, to actively taking care of her when she becomes paralysed. The ending is very heartbreaking, and leaves you wondering if Frankie made the right decision or not. Did it deserve to win Best Picture? Well, as great as it is, and as much as Hilary Swank and Morgan Freeman deserved their awards, I don't think it deserved Best Picture. I would have given that award to The Incredibles, which remains my favourite Pixar movie. But I will say that $1 Million Baby deserved a nomination at least, and it is definitely worth watching. A Beautiful Mind is both a compelling love story and an interestingly dark look at mental illness, one that is built up in an increasingly dark and intense way. Russell Crowe's performance as John Nash is fantastic, and along with the intense fast-paced editing, you really see the struggles he went through, which leads to a hugely poignant scene in which his wife shows him real things to help him through it. But eventually, Nash learned to ignore his hallucinations, returned to teaching, and went on to win the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences. The film has a similar message to that of Forrest Gump, about how you can achieve amazing things in life, even if you have disabilities or mental health issues that present obstacles. And while it is a fantastic movie, I don't think it's the best movie of 2001. While Memento is technically a 2000 movie, it came out in America in 2001, receiving nominations for its screenplay and editing at that ceremony. And I believe that would have been more deserving of Best Picture. But of course, just because I don't think A Beautiful Mind deserved to win, doesn't mean I consider it a bad movie. It's a superbly written, directed, acted, and edited film, and one of the best films of 2001. With all this said, it legitimately shocks me that Akiva Goldsman is credited with writing both this and Batman and Robin. It's become my headcanon that its evil twin wrote the latter film in an evil scheme to tarnish his career. It didn't work out, but he tried.
The heat is on.
I actually rewatched all the Lord of the Rings films for this ranking video. In this situation, the extended editions. The Fellowship of the Ring is a good movie, featuring a fantastic setup, outstanding technical aspects, and solid performances, particularly from Ian McKellen and Christopher Lee.
That said, the pacing can be very slow, and I do lose some interest in the second
and much of the third hour. The Two Towers I enjoy a lot more. While it can also be a bit slow, it serves as a great middle chapter in the story, maintaining the fantastic technical aspects from the original. In this case, outstanding and barely dated CGI for Gollum, as well as improved action scenes and a great continuation of Frodo's arc. Oh, and probably the greatest line of dialogue in any film ever.
Toe tapes.
But they're not the Best Picture winners. That would be The Return of the King. While Return of the King does also have pacing issues, it takes the chance to flesh out its characters for the last time, particularly Frodo, whose character arc comes to a fantastic and poignant conclusion, and Gollum, who we learn the backstory of, and whose manipulation and greed are expanded on. To some extent, I think Frodo and Gollum's final fight is symbolic. Despite needing to destroy the ring in order to keep the Fellowship safe, Frodo almost gives in to the power of the ring, only for Gollum to track him and bite off his finger for the ring. Frodo essentially gets a small taste of losing his life to the ring, but rejects that power and lives, while Gollum literally hoards the power of the ring and dies with it. And the film maintains the amazing technical aspects and superb performances of the first two movies. While strangely not in the theatrical cut, Christopher Lee's role is brief but present as Saruman in the extended cut, bringing even more intensity to the character before he dies. And Ian McKellen and Hugo Weaving are also fantastic in their major roles.
A problem a lot of people have pointed out is the numerous fake-out endings. And, yeah, it is a bit jarring. It's not that the film has a lot of endings, I understand that, as they're wrapping up a huge franchise and everything needs closure. It's more that it fades out and in continually, and eventually it becomes annoying. But they are really good endings. So, did it deserve Best Picture? Well, despite being undoubtedly a huge achievement in filmmaking, I don't think it was the best movie of 2003. I personally would have given it to the film Oldboy, which, despite not even receiving a Best Foreign Language Film nomination, is a fantastic film, featuring an amazing screenplay, superb direction, great performances, and a twist which, despite being dark and disturbing as shit, manages to be both subversive and work in the context of the story. Honestly, the best kind of plot twist. While not the best film of 2003, Return of the King is still a fantastic film, with a lot of passion and effort put into it from its cast and crew. Slumdog Millionaire is a brilliant film. One of the main aspects of the movie I love is the protagonist Jamal. He's a character I sympathise with all the way through, and one I want to see succeed in his life. I also like how he has different goals throughout his life. At the beginning, it seems as though his goal is to prove his innocence and genuine knowledge on Kambanega Kripati, and this essentially leads into the film's non-linear narrative, which, much like Cloud Atlas, Memento, and much of Tarantino's filmography, works in the movie's favour, as Jamal explains how he knows all the answers. In his youth, his goal was to find a better life. As he gets older, his goal becomes to find his love interest Latika, and he went on the game show knowing she watched it. And by the end of the film, he achieves all of his goals, proving his innocence, winning the grand prize on the game show, and finally, winning Latika's heart. And the credits have the superb Jai Ho song number. The cast are superb as well, particularly Dev Patel, Frida Pinto, and Anka Vekel, who, although playing a more minor character than the other two, still strongly conveys the evil side to my mum. Did it deserve to win Best Picture? Well, of the 2008 films I've seen, I'd currently say so. I might change my mind the next time I watch The Dark Knight, but whether or not I do, there's something we ought to thank The Dark Knight and Wall-E for, and that's for prompting the Academy to extend their list of Best Picture nominees to 10, thus paving the way for more animated and superhero films to be nominated. Only 2 animated movies? And how many superhero movies? Just Black Panther? Black Panther isn't even the best MCU film of 2018. While I thought Gladiator had a lot of great things in it on my first viewing, including direction, acting, and technical aspects, the script was what brought it down for me. On rewatch, however, the script is fucking brilliant, as is most of the rest of the movie. The performances from Russell Crowe and Joaquin Phoenix are both phenomenal, and while I do think Tom Hanks should have won Best Actor for Castaway, I'd say Crowe's performance in this movie was a close second, managing to showcase Maximus's devastation over losing his family, and his determination in ranking up to avenging them. But Phoenix's performance as the villain Commodus is probably even better, and Commodus is a superb and empathetic villain, wanting to prove himself worthy to his father, but turning to evil measures to try and accomplish it, including killing him to take over. We then get the scene in which Maximus reveals himself in the Coliseum, and Commodus tries to hide his inner fear, followed by angrily slashing the bust of his father when he realizes his fear proved his father's point about Maximus being more worthy of succeeding him as the Emperor. Phoenix conveys the character's rage, jealousy, and sadism brilliantly. I also like that the movie doesn't hesitate in making its action scenes as intense as possible, right from the beginning, in which we get a brutal and bloody action scene, aided by the fast-paced editing, bleak colour grading, and intense music by Hans Zimmer and Lisa Gerrard, the latter of whom was ignored by the Academy because of some apparent rules that I can't find anywhere. Do I think the movie is perfect? No. Most of the side characters don't hold a candle to the 2 main characters, but they're not terrible. Do I think it deserved Best Picture? Well, in the mindset that Memento qualified for the 2001 Oscars and not the 2000 ones, I'd say so of the movies I've seen from that year. It's a fantastic accomplishment in filmmaking, made by a hugely talented team of cast and crew members. The Departed is a fantastic movie. The story is intriguing and features some pretty amazing twists, and quite a lot of suspense is built up over the course of the movie. I also like how Matt Damon's character Colin Sullivan is detestable from the beginning, and maintains a detestable personality throughout the film, something that I owe mostly to the character writing, but also to Damon's performance. And speaking of performances, they're all around fantastic, with Leonardo DiCaprio really conveying Billy's deteriorating state of mind, Mark Wahlberg conveying Dignam's increasing hatred for Colin, and Jack Nicholson bringing a threatening presence to Frank Costello.
Although Wahlberg was the only actor to get an Oscar nomination, I think Damon and Nicholson should have also got nominations. A moment where the film's superb technical aspects get a moment to shine through is the scene in which Billy chases Colin. The cinematography, as well as providing beautiful shots, also works to show the chase from the perspectives of both characters, as well as how Billy locates Colin, and the fast-paced editing showing the increasing intensity of the scene. Though I'll say a moment where the technical aspects don't shine so well,
Oh, shit! A rat!
is the CGI on the rat at the end. #yikes. Did it deserve Best Picture? I'd say so. As much as I loved United 93 and thought that film deserved so many more nominations than just Best Director and Best Film Editing, I do think The Departed was a deserved winner of the 2006 films I've seen. Here is another video on controversial cinema. In this video, I will be covering the 1978 rape and revenge horror film I Spit on Your Grave. Do I dare to spit on this movie? Well, initially playing for limited runs in drive-in cinemas in 1978 as Day of the Woman, the film eventually received a wide release in 1980, titled I Spit on Your Grave. The film was lambasted by critics, with Roger Ebert giving it a rare 0 out of 4 stars, and calling it a vile bag of garbage without a shred of artistic distinction, and later the worst film of all time. The film was protested by feminists and accused of glorifying rape. The MPAA tried to prevent the film's producers from using the R rating. After they gave the film an R rating, producer Joseph Sabida added rape scenes, making it an X-rated movie. An agreement was reached where the film removed any references or explicit shots referring to anal rape, and the MPAA restored the original R rating. In an interview with Fangoria, director Miyazaki said in response to the backlash, "Frankly, I'm not concerned whether it receives bad press or not. It doesn't touch me one way or the other whatsoever. If you told me that the public does not like it and the critics like it, then there is something very, very bad about that. Who am I reaching? 300 critics across the United States? Or 2,000 around the world? It's really the public that counts, the 20 million who have seen the film around the globe." The film was banned and or edited in several countries, with Ireland continuing to ban the film to this day. The censored American version of the film was released in Australia in 1982 with an R18 rating. In 1987, the film survived an appeal to ban it, and continued to be sold until 1997, when another reclassification caused its ban in the country. In 2004, the full uncut version was awarded an R18, with the Office of Film and Literature Classification justifying this decision by reasoning that castration is not sexual violence, due to their censorship law forbidding the release of films depicting sexual violence as acceptable or justified. In the United Kingdom, the censors refused it a cinema certificate. As a result, the film was released straight to video due to VHS releases not needing age certificates at the time, and was branded a video nasty by the press. It was on the Director of Public Prosecution's list of prosecutable films until 2001, when a heavily cut version that extensively edited the rape scenes was released with an 18 certificate, with 7 minutes and 2 seconds of the film being cut. The film was re-edited in 2011, with only 2 minutes and 54 seconds of cuts, so that only the scenes of rape that focus on Jennifer's nudity have been banned since 2011. But is all this criticism and controversy warranted? Absolutely. In most countries the film has been released in, it's been classified with an 18 certificate, or the equivalent. That would definitely be the absolute minimum age one should be to watch this, though my advice would be to not watch this film at all, but we'll get to this in the next 2 segments. While I believe most of the controversy with A Clockwork Orange to be unwarranted, and I'm glad it was re-released uncut in the UK in 2000, I Spit on Your Grave should have remained banned, and I'm not at all shocked that they had to edit parts of it to get a UK release. Director Miyazaki has defended the film, saying that the violent nature of the film was necessary to tell the story, and described leading actress Camille Keaton as brave for taking on the role. In my video on A Clockwork Orange, I stated that I didn't need to sit through 1 minute and 20 seconds of a woman being raped to comprehend that she was raped, that being the only area of controversy with that film that I agree with to some extent. I Spit on Your Grave shows Jennifer being raped for more than 20 minutes over the course of 3 individual scenes. Why do we need to sit through 3 extended scenes of Jennifer being raped to realise she was raped? So, it's safe to say that I do agree with the controversy, but what do I think of the film as a whole? Absolute fucking dog shit. I don't have a problem with depictions of violence in film, but I Spit on Your Grave has no merit to its violence. A Clockwork Orange uses violence to comment on dominance and sadism. Taxi Driver, Fight Club, American Psycho and Joker serve as commentaries on how society has impacted the mentalities of their protagonists. Saving Private Ryan uses violence to show not only how barbaric war is, but also to give insight into what the protagonists know they're risking in order to save their titular Private Ryan. Using violence for laughs or satisfaction is also a thing, and it works when the violence is unrealistic, such as in Tom and Jerry and Deadpool. and/or when it happens to a character who deserves it. I Spit on Your Grave is violent, but says nothing about violence, nor does it have any underlying layers within the script as a whole, and it couldn't be construed as dark comedy either, because Jennifer does nothing to deserve it. Despite Camille Keaton's committed performance, and the only reason this film is not completely worthless, Jennifer Hills is such a poorly written protagonist, whose only fleshed out trait is that she's seeking revenge on her rapists. The film does briefly explore her being a writer, but it only comes up at the beginning, and when her rapists rip up her manuscript, not even serving any purpose to her revenge plan. Her ways of getting revenge on her rapists are utterly baffling in execution, no pun intended. But most especially in the case of Johnny. She seductively directs him to enter her car, then halfway back to her house, she points a gun at him and orders him to remove her clothes. Johnny says her being raped was her fault because she was wearing revealing clothing. Instead of just killing him right there, she pretends to believe this, and then invites him back to her house, where they have a bath together, and where Jennifer stands naked in the mirror for God knows how long, probably just so the viewer could take in Camille Keaton's nudity. Then she enters the bath and gives him a handjob, before severing his genitals, leading him to bleed to death before dumping his body in the basement. Why did she not shoot him in the forest? The film also has no artistic merit whatsoever. There's no compelling symbolism, no interesting shots or visuals, nothing. It's a film that literally anyone could direct, not that most people would want to though. So, in case you hadn't guessed, I hate this film, and almost everything about it. But how would I write it, if I had to? Well, my first idea stems from director Miyazaki's alleged inspiration for the film, in which he stated he helped a young woman who'd been raped in New York. He said that he, a friend and his daughter were driving by a park when they saw a young woman crawl out of the bushes bloodied and naked. They picked her up, returned her home, and decided to take her to the police rather than the hospital, not wanting the attackers to escape and find further victims. They quickly realised they had made the wrong decision. The officer, who Zaki described as not fit to wear the uniform, delayed taking her to the hospital, instead insisting she follow formalities such as giving her full name and the spelling, despite her jaw being broken and her hardly being able to speak. Zaki insisted that the officer take her to the hospital, and he eventually complied. Soon afterward, the woman's father wrote both Zaki and his friend a letter of thanks for helping his daughter. The father offered a reward, which Zaki refused. I honestly have no idea why this wasn't the film. Especially for the time, it would address the awfulness of rape, with the underlying theme of police incompetence, and present the rescuers with an interesting conflict as to whether to take her to hospital or to the police first. In writing it this way, this could also allow for time to flesh out the personality and interests of the victim, as to not have her be reduced to being a rape victim. So, with all this said, do I believe the movie to be worth watching in any way, shape or form?
Absolutely.
When it's not Wait a minute.
Fucking absolutely. Absolutely fucking not.
When it's not gratuitously disturbing, I Spit on Your Grave is just dull to watch. I've never dedicated part of any of my videos to talking about a film with a rating of less than 2 out of 10. None of the DreamWorks or Disney films I watched for ranking videos were less than a 2 out of 10. I Spit on Your Grave has the dishonour of being the worst film that I've talked about on this channel to date, not counting brief mentions of films like Freddy Got Fingered or Movie 43, which are even worse than this film. As mentioned before, it would be a 0 out of 10, but Camille Keaton's performance gives it a single point. 1 out of 10. Do not recommend. Well, it's been 1 year since the release of Disney's Once Upon a Studio, and also 101 years since the Walt Disney Company was founded. I thought it would be interesting to look at this short film in retrospect. While Disney had a rough year of critical and financial flops in 2023, including their terrible feature-length 100th anniversary film, the one thing that everyone loved was Once Upon a Studio, made to celebrate the company's 100th anniversary. While Disney has had its history of making films and shorts to advertise everything they own, even ones that were exclusive to Disney+. Great marketing strategy, guys. They managed to strike gold with this short. Rather than showing off everything they own, this short is a celebration of everything they made. Last year, I watched every Walt Disney Animation Studios film for the ranking video I did less than a year ago. And while I wasn't a fan of all of them, I am nonetheless glad they included characters from each one. Because, whether or not you like Home on the Range, Oliver and Company, The Black Cauldron, or indeed Chicken Little, they are nonetheless part of the studio's history. And, while I would call them all bad, I would also say they have at least one saving grace each. The short also manages to respect the fields of both 2D and 3D animation by showing the characters how they appeared in their films without any changes, which in turn honours the history of the studio, as well as how both fields of animation have their perks. I like how the short opens with Bernie Mattison, who worked at Disney for 70 years, interacting with a black female intern, a subtle indication of the progress of Disney's inclusivity over the decades, as well as honouring the longest-serving employee of the company. I like how Tiana is the one who informs everyone of Mickey and Minnie's call to prepare for the group photo, being the most recently introduced 2D animated protagonist in a Disney film. And I also enjoy the interaction between Mickey and Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. While Walt lost the rights to Oswald in 1928, and never regained the rights at the point of his death, he created Mickey. And so having Mickey say, "After you," is a subtle but poignant line, referring to Oswald's significance. They also feature a moment where Mickey honours Walt's memory while looking at a photo of him, with an instrumental of Walt's favourite song, Feed the Birds, playing in the background. I like to think that the Sherman Brothers are up there playing the song for Walt in heaven. There also manages to be a lot of funny moments, like the characters in the lift being forced to wait for Flash, and Baymax then squashing them all. That creature from Strange World, whose name I forgot, pursuing Ursula, more memorable than anything in Strange World. Max stealing Prince Charming's shoe, Ralph hitting the door and calling Mickey Garfield, and Goofy accidentally breaking the camera. They managed to get a lot of voice actors back to voice their characters, including Jeremy Irons voicing Scar for the first time since the original Lion King, as well as Robbie Benson finally getting to sing as the Beast, and Tom Hulce coming out of retirement to voice Quasimodo again. For some characters, mainly those whose actors died, they use archive recordings, including the irreplaceable Robin Williams as the Genie. And while I commend them doing this, who else to voice Jiminy Cricket than Cliff Edwards for the end, the different microphones can be obvious and slightly jarring at certain points. But it's never massively jarring. For characters with new dialogue or lyrics, whose original voice actors had died, such as Snow White and Baloo, they recast them. And a lot of the choices worked pretty well. While we didn't get to see the scene of Alan Tudyk's characters interacting, it was cool to hear him as the voice of the Mad Hatter, which makes a lot of sense considering that King Candy is inspired by him. I do wish some characters had made appearances, such as Mufasa. He was an important character to the Lion King, and Simba and Nala appear as lion cubs, so it wouldn't be a case of Simba and his dad looking too similar. It also would have been nice to hear the late great James L. Jones voice Mufasa one last time. The ending in which all the characters sing When You Wish Upon a Star is highly emotional, and it makes me think, why doesn't Disney do a spin-off series to this short, in which their characters sing songs from each other's films? Instead of those unnecessary Simpsons shorts that only serve to advertise what they own, do a spin-off series featuring the characters that they made, singing each other's songs. A short featuring a medley of villain songs would be nice for next Halloween, Disney. So, here's a new series of videos where I rank every episode of one of the longest running animated shows of all time, The Simpsons. I've been a huge fan of The Simpsons since I was a kid, and I can not only appreciate the show for the impact it has had on animation, and essentially paving the way for adult cartoons like South Park and BoJack Horseman, but also for how great its golden age was. A variety of memorable layered characters, superb satirical commentaries on popular media, iconic catchphrases and quotes, genuinely heartfelt moments, and of course, hilarious layered comedy. And while the show has dipped in quality, and has yet to live up to its golden age, even the later seasons have had their fair share of good episodes. For this ranking, I'm going to be structuring it slightly differently than usual. With most of my movie rankings, I've done worst to best, which I find much easier in that situation, as the movies don't usually follow continuous stories or character arcs. With TV shows, however, I feel it will be easier to talk about them in order of release date, to feel more coherent. In this case, I will finish off with where I would rank them all. So here's my series ranking every episode of The Simpsons, starting with Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire manages to be both funny and poignant. Seeing Homer try to avoid spilling the beans about not getting his Christmas bonus, and trying to find a way to provide a good Christmas for the family, shows how devoted he is. And as well as delivering great drama, the episode manages to provide a lot of great laughs without muddying the tone, some of my favourite jokes being at the Christmas play at the beginning. The first episode, and honestly, a really good start. While Bart the Genius isn't quite as poignant as Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, it's definitely a lot funnier. Some of my favourite comedic moments in the episode are the game of Scrabble at the beginning, and when the family go to an opera performance, where Homer and Bart make each other, and also Lisa, laugh. And speaking of Homer and Bart, I do like the relationship between them in the episode, and I think it has a relatively realistic edge to it. I also like Bart's character arc in the episode, wanting an opportunity to be seen as a genius, but then finding that he enjoyed his old school life a lot more, and confessing to cheating on the test. Really good episode. Homer's Odyssey is a weird one, because I enjoyed rewatching it, but when it finished, I couldn't really think what made it stand out to me, other than how it is interesting to see Homer facing repercussions for his incompetence. And also Black Smithers, I suppose. The episode has pacing issues. While the stuff with Bart at the beginning has good moments, it also takes up too much time considering the episode isn't about him. and maybe dedicating more time to Homer trying to get his job back, and the way he goes around it would have been better. The episode does have good jokes, but unlike Simpsons roasting on an open fire, when combined with the serious moments, the tone feels slightly unbalanced here. It's a decent episode, but I don't have too much to say really. There's No Disgrace Like Home is strange to watch after watching so many subsequent episodes and seasons, mostly because of how different the characters are to how they would be in later seasons, especially having Homer be the voice of reason. But it is a good episode, and it is heartfelt that Homer is shown to love his family despite getting angry at them. And the scene at the end when they all shock each other during family therapy is quite funny. Not the most timeless episode of the show, by a landslide, but a good episode in the mindset of subsequent episodes and seasons not yet existing. Bart the General is an interesting episode. While the beginning is fine, the rest is actually quite funny and intriguing. I like the idea of a load of school kids going up against a school bully in the style of war movies, as it reminds me of how much I enjoy when films and TV shows take certain premises and make them work in the style of a movie genre. That's the most I can say really. The war parody concept is funny and intriguing, and it makes the episode as a whole a good one. Moaning Lisa is a good episode, and one that manages to give each of the four main characters a chance to shine. The main plotline involves Lisa being depressed, and while Marge initially tries to tell Lisa to smile regardless of how she feels inside, she ultimately sees the negative side to this, and tells her to be herself, which helps Lisa become happier, along with her learning to express herself through music with the help of musician Bleeding Gums Murphy. Despite being a comedy, much of classic Simpsons can also address more serious themes, and do so with dignity. We also get a fun side plot in which Homer tries to beat Bart in a boxing video game, and they do manage to connect it to the main storyline. Though, I do kind of feel bad for Homer at the end. An episode that successfully balances comedy and drama, as you'd expect more serious classic Simpsons episodes to do. The Call of the Simpsons is a pretty funny episode. It doesn't have the same emotional impact as some of my preferred episodes of this season, or even Moaning Lisa, but it is funny, which is what we go to The Simpsons for really. The plotline about Homer being mistaken for Bigfoot is so ridiculous, but also really funny. From Homer falling in the mud and babbling, to the newspaper headings surrounding Marge's input on the situation, to scientists trying to determine whether he is human or not. I think the funniest joke outside of this, and maybe the funniest in the episode, is when Homer gets the family stranded, and when he can't do shit, his echo accidentally reveals this.
I've murdered us all! I've murdered us all! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Don't! Oh, don't!
It's mostly just a funny episode, which, as I stated, is what we watch The Simpsons for. The Telltale Head is an episode that provides an interesting character arc for Bart, and one that a lot of people will identify with, wanting to look cool, but not turning to criminal activity in order to achieve it. While Bart is known as a bad boy in school, he does also have a moral compass. This episode introduced Dolph, Jimbo and Kearney, and I like that they're not just one-dimensional bullies in the episode, initially showing respect for Bart, only to make fun of him when he expresses doubt about the morality of decapitating the statue of Jebediah Springfield. The episode also features some good jokes, particularly Homer listening to the football game in church, which plays in sync with what Reverend Lovejoy is saying, and the Godfather reference with the head of the Jebediah Springfield statue. Overall, a funny and somewhat relatable episode. Life on the Fast Lane takes a darker edge than a lot of Season 1 episodes, but I think it does it better than Homer's Odyssey, primarily in how the episode does find a balance between dark subject matter and good humour. Marge finds herself becoming interested in a seductive bowling instructor, which puts a strain on her marriage with Homer, although her motivations line up given how ignorant Homer was on her birthday. Both Marge and Homer get interesting character arcs, with Homer realising he's been a bad husband and trying to change for the better, and Marge realising that, deep down, her heart lies with Homer, and the final scene where Marge chooses Homer is so good. So it's a really good episode, except for Helen Lovejoy's design. My, what weird eyes you have. Homer's Night Out isn't as funny as other episodes, but I still think it's a good episode. I've heard people say the episode is bad because they perceive the concept of a photo of Homer dancing next to another woman finding its way across town, and Marge accusing Homer of objectifying her, ridiculous. But my interpretation is that this is how it leads to its execution of its anti-sexism message. The photo finds its way across town because all the men are attracted to Princess Kashmir, with the photo even being confiscated from some of the men and boys. And I think the reason Marge perceived Homer dancing next to her as objectification was because he put the dollar bill in her G-string. And it does come to the ending in which Homer tries to teach Bart about not objectifying women, and eventually conveys it on stage, consequently reconciling with Marge. While I do consider it a good episode, I do put it lower on the list, just because I don't find it as funny as other episodes. The Creps of Wrath has good jokes, including when Skinner's mother comes to Springfield Elementary and the boys act innocent. I do think it's a bit too mean-spirited to Bart in the way his adoptive parents treat him, even if this was likely intentional. But the outcome at the end is warranted. I also like to assume that Homer's bad back was healed when Bart agreed to go to France. Only reason I can think of him suddenly jumping off the couch like a motherfucker when hearing it. The show's first dive into a whodidit mystery, in which Krusty is arrested, and Bart enlists the help of Lisa to prove his innocence. I like the build-up to the revelation that it was Sideshow Bob. Kelsey Grammer makes his first appearance as Bob, and showcases a great voice performance, both in the speaking and also singing department. And Bob's motivations as to why he did it make a lot of sense, and you feel sorry for him to some extent. I also like when he says to treat kids as equals and not underestimate their intelligence. This is what I'd like to say to all those who say, "But it's for kids," when I'm explaining the problem with bad kids films or shows. Krusty Gets Busted is a really good episode overall, and the first major appearance of one of the best supporting characters on the show. Some Enchanted Evening is a good episode. It's hard not to mention the episode's famous smooth animation, but it's also not the only thing the episode has going for it. I like Homer's character development in the episode, showing that, despite him being a selfish buffoon at times, he does love Marge, and gives her a night at a restaurant and motel. It also manages to have a hilarious ending in which Homer unknowingly helps Mrs. Botts escape the police, and lies about fighting her to the media. But it does also have a heartwarming scene of Marge consoling Homer over his ability to raise 3 kids who can hogtie a criminal. Good episode. So overall, a good start to the series. Will Season 2 follow suit? Well, not one of the funniest episodes of The Simpsons, but one that nonetheless manages to blend humour and emotion brilliantly. Bart discovers that he is failing class, and is given one more chance to improve his grades, otherwise he'll have to repeat the 4th grade. Which, funnily enough, all the students have done, given that over 30 years later, they're still in the 4th grade. Bart ultimately decides to step up his game, but he discovers that he has difficulty focusing, even when he tries hard to revise, and even prays to God for things to work out. With a blizzard taking place, Lisa advises Bart to stay home and revise while everyone else has fun, ultimately being confined to the darkness of a basement while everyone else is outside in the brightness of the town. However, despite his best efforts, he fails by 1 mark, and what we get is one of the saddest and most relatable moments in the show, Bart practically breaking down as, despite his best efforts, he failed, saying that you can do your best and still not necessarily succeed, which is ultimately a hard but important thing to understand. Though of course, it does have a happier outcome, and Bart manages to succeed, saying,
"But part of this D- belongs to God."
A fantastic episode that blends humour and heart brilliantly, and is very likely to end up near the top of the final list. Simpson and Delilah is a good episode. While it's not as funny or poignant as other episodes, it has good moments. I think Carl is an interesting character, and Harvey Fierstein brings a lot to him, both vocally and also behind the scenes in terms of his character design. I like how on Homer and Marge's wedding anniversary, Carl hires a singer to perform "You Are So Beautiful" to Marge, and then when Marge sings the song to console Homer at the end of the episode. It's probably my favourite moment in the episode. I also like how the episode shows some humanity in Mr. Burns when he sympathises with Homer's male pattern baldness and gives him his old job back. It's just a good episode. See it for what it is. Treehouse of Horror, the first Halloween episode of The Simpsons. While I can commend this episode for paving the way for genuinely hilarious Halloween episodes, I don't think this one is particularly strong as a whole, but still good. Hungry Are the Damned is my favourite of the 3 segments, as it has a lot of funny jokes to it, especially the How to Cook for Humans scene and the references to HBO and Pong, as well as an interesting shot of Homer and Marge's heads over the served plates to indicate the aliens will cook and serve them like this. Bad Dream House and The Raven are funny segments. That's about it. And James Earl Jones is entertaining in his vocal roles across all 3 segments. A good episode, but ultimately one that is more groundbreaking than it is outstanding. 2 Cars in Every Garage and 3 Eyes on Every Fish is a funny episode. I like its themes of environmentalism and its satirical commentary on politics, as well as the way Marge follows Mr. Burns at the end. Good episode overall. Dancing Homer is a good episode with some funny moments, particularly Marge trying to get Bart's ball signed, and Mr. Burns not knowing the names of the Simpsons family.
Ah, well, if it isn't the Simps!
Don't have much more to say, but I liked it. Dead Putting Society is a funny episode, particularly in watching Homer act like an overly competitive buffoon throughout the episode. His attempt to humiliate Ned comes to a comedic karma ending, in which he claims they both lost the bet and now have to mow each other's lawns in their wives' dresses, only for Ned to enjoy it and Homer to be the humiliated one. There's also some funny moments in Lisa training Bart for the golf tournament. It's not an amazing episode, but it is a funny one all the same. There's a lot of funny jokes in this episode, and even some subtle commentary, such as when Mr. Burns has Smithers dispose of a huge quantity of food, as well as Kent Brockman doing a human interest story at the soup kitchen, primarily hoping to win an Emmy. I do think Bart is a bit too mean-spirited in the episode, however, implemented when he destroys Lisa's centerpiece, and, for a lot of the episode, doesn't regret it. But he does have an arc in the episode, giving money to the homeless guys he met, and seeing how badly he upset Lisa and apologizing. A good episode overall. Bart the Daredevil is quite a funny and also emotionally gripping episode that shows how, despite getting easily annoyed by him, Homer, and also Lisa, do nonetheless care about Bart's safety, with Homer being willing to kill himself to show Bart the danger of jumping Springfield Gorge when nothing else works. Though this does result in Bart learning his lesson, Homer ends up inadvertently riding over the gorge anyway, and in comedically dark fashion, ends up falling down the gorge twice. And honestly, this never fails to crack me up. Many years before South Park took on the topic of censorship as a recurring theme, both on the small and big screen, The Simpsons managed to take it on in an interesting commentary with Itchy and Scratchy and Marge. As well as having a hilarious Psycho reference, the episode leans into the question if cartoons influence children to become violent, and also about the hypocrisy of trying to censor one form of art, but not another, shown in Marge getting Itchy and Scratchy toned down, but seeing David as a work of art. I like how even the toned down Itchy and Scratchy cartoons manage to be hilarious, and how this prompts the bored children to go outside, creating the illusion of a cheerful utopia. Ultimately, I conceive the episode's message to be about not censoring art because one person dislikes it, as this can start a chain of other people having art censored because they don't like it. And also something that, as mentioned before, South Park would go on to address many times. A very funny and thought-provoking episode. This was the first episode to guest star the late great Phil Hartman. Revisiting these episodes in order of air date reminds me of the comedic delivery Hartman brought to both Lionel Hutz and Troy McClure. And overall, this is a good episode with some funny moments, particularly in how Homer and Bart try to fabricate the truth for financial gain beyond Bart's medical bills, while Mr. Burns tries to fabricate the truth and ends up infuriating everyone, including Smithers.
You believed his cock and bull story?
And it's good to see Marge bring her moral compass to court, and the reconciliation between her and Homer at the end is a very emotional one. Good episode. This is an interesting episode that maintains both humour and poignancy in Homer trying to make the most of the potential final hours of his life, along with the hilarious ending in which he vows to make the most of his life, but simply does what he was doing before. A good episode. When I think of Simpsons episodes that show why Homer and Marge's relationship feels genuine, one of the first to come to mind is The Way We Was. The episode shows that, despite Homer's flaws, he really loves and respects Marge. I especially love the detail of Marge teaching Homer French, and then after the prom, he fixes her dress with the corsage he bought her, saying, "Poor vous," which ended up becoming a common saying in their relationship going forward, as well as Close to You essentially becoming their song. Like Artie, Homer loves Marge. Unlike Artie, Homer respects Marge, which is something I feel later writers would misunderstand. And the episode has a lot of really good jokes. The reference to Siskel and Ebert is hilarious, and my favourite jokes are when Homer says, "English? Who needs that? I'm never going to England," as well as his quote-unquote rebuttal. A very funny and also emotionally gripping episode, and one you ought to love if you were to understand how legitimate Homer and Marge's love for each other is. This is a really good episode. I like the arc Homer has in stealing cable, only for Lisa to convince him not to watch the fight at the end, and then cut off the cable connection. A really good episode. Principal Charming manages to have both humour and heart. It has funny references to Vertigo and Gone with the Wind, but it also gives character development to both Principal Skinner and Patty. Despite Patty seeming unlikable, especially in ruining Selma's chance at marrying a co-worker, it is shown that she cares for her sister, passing up marrying Skinner due to the bond she has with Selma. Skinner accepts the situation, and humorously reasserts his authority over Bart. Good episode. This is a decent episode. My favourite joke is probably when Homer cries about not being able to find the Shelbyville orphanage. The design of the Homer is pretty creatively bizarre as well. With this said, the ending rubs me the wrong way. While Homer's car was a disaster, Herb did ask Homer to design the car, and never oversaw any of the design blueprints, only to then blame him when he goes bankrupt. And this does bring the episode down for me, though it's far from a bad episode. I do think the ending to this episode is poignant, though I do think the point about Santa's little helper being reckless is dragged out for too long. Good episode overall though. Old Money is a very emotionally gripping episode. The relationship between Grandpa and Bee is very touching, and her death is very sad. While the episode does have a lot of funny jokes, as you'd expect from The Simpsons, it has quite a serious angle, and a poignant ending in which Homer stops Grandpa from gambling our money away, and Grandpa instead uses the money to repair the retirement home, renaming the dining room in her honour. Really good episode. This is a really good episode. I like the humour that comes in Homer getting stuck in the water slide and trying to lose weight as a result of it, and how it leads to him discovering Marge's old paintings of Ringo Starr, which prompts Lisa to suggest Marge go to a painting class where her artwork proves successful. When Mr. Burns asks Marge to paint a picture of him for an upcoming museum wing, she becomes frustrated by his personality and the way he speaks to her family. Despite becoming demotivated and unsure of how to make him beautiful, she finds a decades-late letter from Ringo Starr praising her artwork and prompting her to continue, leading to quite an interesting message about what the portrait shows. I also really like Ringo Starr's two scenes and how well incorporated they are into the story, as well as his guest appearance. Though, having grown up with the classic era of Thomas the Tank Engine, of which he narrated the first two seasons, it's hard not to imagine him finishing one of his lines with, "said Thomas."
Yeah, said Thomas.
Lisa's Substitute is a very funny and poignant episode. The plotline about Mr. Bergstrom being Lisa's substitute teacher manages to have a lot of poignancy to it, while the plotline about Bart wanting to be class president has a lot of funny jokes. And I like how the two plotlines come together at the end, when Homer consoles both Lisa and Bart over the negative outcomes. Mr. Bergstrom is a great one-off character, shown to care about his students, particularly Lisa, and his note to her before he leaves is especially poignant. Dustin Hoffman brings a lot to his vocal performance, and it even comes with a funny Graduate reference. Sex! Now that I've got your attention, watch Lisa's Substitute, it's great. The War of the Simpsons juggles a plotline of Marge trying to fix her and Homer's marriage, and one of Bart and Lisa taking advantage of Grandpa taking care of them, and both are very well done. The setup in which Homer gets drunk at a house party is genuinely funny, particularly when Homer tells off a guest he doesn't know, and the end of the party, where Dr. Hibbert tells Marge what to do if she wants Homer to survive the night, and Homer's response to Marge sharing her humiliation. When Marge signs her and Homer up for marriage counselling, Homer tries to seize the opportunity to go fishing, but eventually lets a huge catfish go to show his love for her. While Homer and Marge's story has an emotionally gripping end, Bart, Lisa and Grandpa's has a funny twist, in which after Bart and Lisa trick him into letting them have a house party, he tricks them into cleaning the house by pretending to cry. To some extent, all the characters win in their own way in the end. This is a good episode. It's not quite as funny as other episodes, but it has some funny jokes, and it does have an intriguing message about learning to share. Blood Feud has a lot of really funny moments, including when the family debate the lesson they learned by the end. But my favourite moment is when Homer pretends to be Mr. Burns to get back the letter Bart sent, and forgetting his first name. It may well be the most comedically layered scene in The Simpsons at this point. There's the giant painting atop the post office, Homer using a fake voice, like that's going to make any difference. The fake voice not even sounding like Mr. Burns. He doesn't know his boss's name. He continues to use the fake voice in spite of it. The delivery of, "I don't know." He blames Bart. 7 jokes in just 15 seconds. I also like how even though Smithers stands by Mr. Burns a lot of the time, he draws the line at allowing him to have Homer beaten in response to his angry letter, reminding him that the Simpsons saved his life, prompting Burns to send them an Olmec head. Really good end to the season. An improvement over Season 1, and with many considering the golden age of The Simpsons to be Seasons 3 to 8, I think optimism is the best state of mind for what's to come. There's always a debate from around October to December and what it involves is a certain stop-motion dark fantasy film released in 1993. In this video, we call an analysis, Everyone Hail the Nightmare Before Christmas. The debate is whether this National Film Registry preserved classic is a Halloween film or a Christmas film. Well, the answer is both. But there is still something to be said about this film, and how it succeeds at being both a Halloween film and a Christmas film. A Christmasween classic, if you will.
Yeah, there it is! There it is!
For the two people who don't know, The Nightmare Before Christmas focuses on a protagonist named Jack Skellington, who is recognised as the Pumpkin King within his hometown, Halloween Town. Tired of doing the same thing every year, Jack ends up stumbling across Christmas Town and schemes to take over the holiday. One thing I think everyone can agree is fantastic is the animation. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Stop motion is one of, if not the most timeless form of animation. Over 3 decades later, and it still looks fantastic, from the variety of memorable character designs to the detailed sets and lighting. There is one particular design I'll call attention to later on. The film also uses visual effects, with the ghosts being 2D animated, and these effects have aged really well too. This was the first fully animated film to be nominated for the Oscar for Best Visual Effects, and while Jurassic Park was a deserved winner, The Nightmare Before Christmas was a deserved nominee. I think the concept of Jack trying to bring Halloween to Christmastown is a funny concept, and it, predictably, has hilariously disastrous consequences. A particularly funny moment for me happens near the beginning, in which Jack disappears, and everyone is desperate to find him, due to there only being 364 more days until the next Halloween. That just made me laugh so hard. The songs range from good to great. The standout song, of course, is This Is Halloween, which does a great job of establishing Halloween Town and its residents. What's This would be the next best song for me, having a memorable rhythm to it as Jack explores Christmas Town. I'd also like to give mention to Kidnap the Sandy Claus, in which Lock, Shock and Barrel sing about the ways they could kidnap Santa, only to then simply knock on his door and abduct him. And on the topic of Santa being kidnapped, he's taken to Oogie Boogie, who is a fun villain. He serves as a contrast to the other residents of Halloween Town, as, while they simply scare as a profession, and are actually good guys, Oogie Boogie is a bad guy. And while his motivation for being evil isn't revealed in the film, sometimes it's okay to have villains that are evil just for the sake of being evil, without a tragic backstory or a redemption arc. Provided, of course, they're interesting and or entertaining to watch, which Oogie Boogie is. I also love his design. Initially he seems to be a sentient bag, but as it turns out, the bag covers up his body of bugs. This inner design is both detailed and unnerving. I also love Jack's arc over the course of the film, wanting something different for Halloween, but realising that taking over Christmas just isn't suited for him, and returning to his role as the Pumpkin King, while also developing new ideas for Halloween going forward, which stemmed from his actions over the course of the film. With Santa being set free, he flies out the lair, though I do wonder why he didn't do it while Sally had Oogie Boogie distracted, rather than trying to climb the rope she sent through. He brings some Christmas cheer to Halloween Town, with the reprise of This Is Halloween and What's This, as the residents embrace their home of Halloween Town, while being invested in the snow that falls. On the topic of Sally, I also like her as a character. She has a memorable design, a kind personality, and a great motivation in wanting more in life, which strengthens her romantic interest in Jack. And the ending scene where they kiss on the iconic hill in the cemetery is a nice end to the story. In this sense, The Nightmare Before Christmas manages to embrace the holidays of both Halloween and Christmas. So yeah, with its beautiful animation, memorable characters, great music, and darkly comedic storyline, it's overall a great classic. If you, somehow, haven't seen it, I'd fully recommend doing so.